Josh Daniels from the Clerk Auditor's Office. So for this agenda item, we're going to walk through a couple of different slides and some information. I'll start with a little bit of a general overview of property tax, the property tax system, the rates in Utah County, particularly over time and with respect to economic trends in the county. Deneen, our county budget officer and county finance officer, will walk through some of the specifics of the budget as it's looking for next year. And I think she'll also create an opportunity during her presentation for departments, if that's something you still wanted to do, where departments maybe can come up and talk a little bit briefly about the trajectory of growth that they're experiencing in their department and maybe some details behind the request for 2020. So I know that many understand this, but for really the benefit of everybody, the public included, just a little bit of high-level background of how the county's general fund is generally funded. Two primary revenue sources are property tax and sales tax. There's also a number of other revenues. There's fees and fines and things like that that are added into this mix. But really the driving force of revenue for the general fund activities of the government of Utah County are property tax and sales tax. And this chart here shows the share of property and sales tax over time going back a little over 10 years. You'll notice that there are some increases in the mid-2000s that was primarily driven, so there's a total, right? It's a stacked chart. The blue is property tax, the red is sales tax. There were actually property tax increases in Utah County in the mid-2000s in the form of a shifting of money from the A&C rate into the general rate that created essentially a net increase in tax rates for Utah County, even though it didn't go through the traditional truth and taxation process because it was a little bit complicated. There was some sort of narrow opportunity for that under state law with rearranging how you fund assessing and collecting and general fund activities. But it resulted in essentially a net property tax increase, which is why you see that bump. But then you'll notice starting in about 2014, the property tax rate increase is outpaced by the increase in sales tax revenue. What you're seeing there is you're seeing post-recession growth in Utah County. One of the challenges, though, is that your budget becomes increasingly dependent on sales tax revenue versus property tax revenue, which is subject to exogenous economic forces that are imposed on you. So that's potentially a concerning trend. The next slide here, so using a specific example of Provo, any and every city is sort of similar. So a resident who lives in Utah County and pays property taxes, the total amount that they pay in property tax each year goes to a variety of government entities throughout the county that receive that revenue, the largest of which is the school district. We have 3 school districts in the county, Alpine, Nebo, and Provo. So just using this example of a typical property in Provo, using the average value in the county of $334,000 for a home, and under the exemption of 45%, essentially you're looking at a taxable value of $183,000. That would create a property tax liability for that particular homeowner of $1,900. Where does that money go? Well, in the case of Provo, if you lived in Provo, and it's a little different from city to city, but it's all generally within 3 or 4% of this, you'd pay 70% of those property taxes to the school district. That's the largest share. The next largest share is the city, the municipality. In this case, it's 17.5%. And then you have the county general fund, which is 6.8%. Then you have, of course, Central Utah Water District. There are other special districts as well that make up a very small share throughout the county. In this particular example, this particular homeowner isn't paying into a special district. And then there's the assessing and collecting rate, which is to cover the cost of running the property tax system. That covers the treasurer, the recorder, the assessor, the tax administration, et cetera, throughout the county. That benefits all of those government entities that receive property tax revenue. So what this shows you is, the average person paying property tax, the vast majority goes to school district, and then the municipality, and then you have the county general fund. That's kind of how it's split out.
Josh, if you just were to go back on this. So I think this is always a helpful slide, so that essentially one thing, if I'm understanding correctly, everything that you're about to talk about with our
Right.
general fund, if people think about their property taxes in terms of, in this example here, this $1,979.
Right.
That's not the amount that if we were to have an increase, we'd be talking about increasing. It's only the portion that is the county. That's the only rate that the county commission sets. So it's this $134
Exactly.
that could be subject to the increase based on this meeting.
Yeah, that's correct. And that's a really good point and distinction. The county government administers the property tax system, but that's a service to all the other local government type entities throughout the county, school district being a sort of government type entity. But the only property tax rate that's actually set by the county is the county general fund rate, technically also the assessing and collecting rate. That's to recoup that cost of administering the system. But in the case of the school district or a municipality or a special district, they're setting their rate through their own truth and taxation process. And so in terms of the county budget and this conversation, we're really only looking at the purple section of this pie, which is the 6.8% of the property tax liability for any given payer of that rate. And right, currently at 6.8, that's $134 in this example for this, sort of average home that would be located in one of the municipalities, Provo. So this is just a stacked bar chart showing the exact same thing that you saw in the pie chart. Now this slide is looking at what is the effective tax rate on residential property owners throughout the county over time, as far back as we have easy data to obtain, which in this case was 1985. So looking at the mill rate, the millionths, one way to talk about it, this is the general levy, and it's the effective rate, meaning it's the total market value. You're using, the total property tax liability over the total market value. That's, I think, how the average taxpayer would think about their own tax liability. They would say, look, my house is worth X and I pay Y. What does that look like? So what you see is fairly consistent decline over time. There's some few specific changes in particular years. There's a couple of interesting dynamics at play in this particular chart. One is that I think that the way we assess property for the market value has gotten better. If you look at your property valuation notice today, you're going to notice that the market value that's on your assessment is close to a true market value. It's been said that in the past that wasn't really the case. This assessment, the way they assessed property or the way they appraised property for property tax purposes just wasn't the same way. So that's part of the decline you're seeing. Obviously, property tax values have increased, but the nominal dollar amount, or at least the sort of budgeted amount, has stayed relatively constant over time because of the truth and taxation process. You have to go out of your way to increase property tax revenue, otherwise the rate will float down. So this is different than other states where their property tax system, the rate might stay constant. And if your valuation goes up, the amount you pay goes up. Well, it doesn't work like that in Utah. As your value goes up, your effective rate will go down unless there's some change to the property tax revenue that's consciously decided by a government entity through the truth and taxation process.
One comment on that.
Go
I think another clarification that can be helpful in this is, so often we're conditioned when we speak about taxes from the news of our federal government and state government. So in income tax, for example, we have a relatively high tax rate, and nobody wants that to go up, right? But there's also a certain logic to that says, why should the tax rate be going up? If we have a healthy economy and our economy is expanding, then the revenue, nobody would say that the government doesn't need any additional revenue, right? But the fiscally conservative argument is that the way that revenue comes through is by the low rate applied to an expanding economy instead of increasing the rate and potentially hurting the economy. But that doesn't happen here. And then it's same thing at the state level, state income tax. Why would we ever be raising that in a booming scenario? As a taxpayer, I would raise my hand and say, why on earth? I want to go out and hear from any elected official who wants to do that, especially right now. And so sometimes that same mindset would be applied to what we're doing here today and would say, well, why are we even talking about this in a booming economy? And that is the key issue I think that you raised, is that with property tax, that's not the case. Every year, the property, since 2012 or further back, the property rate has decreased. So your home value is assessed at a higher number, but as a result, if you take the same pool of property and it's worth more today, automatically under state law, unless we do something, which we haven't done historically, that rate is reduced so that the same amount of dollars come into the county general fund.
Right.
And so
Yeah.
I think that's a distinction that doesn't apply to income tax or sales tax discussions.
It's not the same amount of dollars. The dollars increases.
So the dollars would only
You're talking
increase
about a
if
rate,
the
not talking
homes
about
increase. The dollars would increase if the homes increased. If you had, let's say you had 100, you had 100 homes total, that was it. And year one, the total tax revenue was set at, whatever, $1 million. You take the $1 million divided by the 100 homes, whatever the valuation of the 100 homes were in total, that would set your rate. The very next year, if you still had 100 homes, you would only get $1 million in revenue. The only way you would get more revenue is if you had 102 homes. And then what you would do is you would take the $1 million that you are essentially guaranteed as local government from the year before. You would take the $1 million you're guaranteed divided by the total valuation currently of the 100 homes in that year. That would create your rate. You would then apply that rate to, we got Windows that doesn't like to, Windows is so impatient sometimes. You would have, so then you would, once you set the rate based on the assumption of the 100 homes, you would apply the rate to the 102 homes. And that's where the new growth comes in, is that second year, you now have 2 homes in this universe, and those 2 new homes are generating additional revenue that is their share of the revenue that they're bringing to the table that's at the same rate as the pre-existing 100 homes. So you're right that the dollars, the total nominal dollars would go up over time if you're growing in terms of total, if you have new growth. If you were in a county where there was no new growth, then the total dollar value in property tax revenue would actually stay the same. You would capture sales tax. So if the economy was booming and there was more transactions happening in terms of sales, then your sales tax revenue could or would go up. But in terms of property tax revenue, your property tax revenue would stay the same. So, and to test this theory, you could take a home and if you could find a very typical home, and it was existing in the county 30 years ago, and it still existed today, and that home went up and down in market value in line with the rest of the county, then theoretically the amount of dollars that homeowner would pay over time would be relatively constant. I actually did that. So I picked a home that was built around 1905, right in historic Provo. Hasn't changed at all. I know the homeowners. I used to live nearby. And they haven't changed. The home's been owned by the same family for 30 years. They've made little changes to the home. They didn't add an extra bedroom, which would increase sort of the economic footprint, if you will, of that home, and thereby change forever the trajectory of their tax. In 1997, it was a high year. There were some things going on in 97, but in 1997, they paid $105 total in county property tax, and last year they paid $98 in actual just dollars, dollar to dollar. And it's bumped up and down throughout the 80s, 70s, and 80s and 90s. And the reason that happens is because you would only pay the same if your house always increased and decreased in market value the exact same as every other house. But sometimes what happens is some houses in one part of the county, they will increase in value at a faster rate than other houses, their actual property tax burden will grow rather than stay constant. So that's one feature where people will see differences over time. But if you look at it on a countywide basis, the amount of nominal dollar revenue that you receive from pre-existing homes over time stays the same, and you get more from new growth.
And if you were to test that, just in case anyone who is enough of a nerd to watch this and test it out, right? Again, just to reiterate, the point is, it might be that your dollar amount has gone up since 1997, at least in the case of this one homeowner.
Right.
Or stayed relatively constant. But their total property tax bill has increased probably significantly.
Yes.
Because their city and their school district has been through truth and taxation a number of times during
That's
that
correct.
period. But Utah County has not.
Correct. Yep, that's correct.
But
So-
you would agree that, like in 1984, our property tax was roughly around $10 million.
Right.
And our property tax in the way of collection of actual dollars is closer to $40 million now.
Correct. And that is from new growth.
Right.
So then the question becomes, is the revenue you receive from your property tax over that period of time adequate to deal with the new growth?
Now we're talking about a formula. Is the formula correct? If it was correct in 1984, is it correct today? That's the question.
Well, there's not really a formula because it's a raw dollar amount. The way that the system works is it says you got 10 million in 1984. That means in 1985 you're entitled to 10 million. And theoretically in 2019 you're only entitled to 10 million. The only way in which you're entitled to more than 10 million is if you get a whole bunch of more new houses that come into that county. So if nobody moved into the county and no new property was created or developed, there was no new growth, no new development, you would still have $10 million today.
Right. I mean, formula based in the sense that if in 1984 the formula that was assessed to the property value and also the property tax was paid was correct to support the government and the services that were needed and necessary, and then you add another one, if that formula is correct, then yes, it just grows into the next years as we're going, and as we go up, then if that formula is correct, it should support itself because it
Yep.
supported the past.
Yeah, theoretically that would be true. Yep. And I think another slide, one of the next slides will help to kind of do this. This is a comparison chart of rates. So Utah County's general fund rate is the red one at the bottom. You have the school district just for reference. You know, a lot of the school district rates are kind of up there. I mean, a big chunk of school district funding comes from property tax. If you compare our general fund rate in our county to some of the other counties, those are the other lines. I've got a better chart of this. We'll go to the next slide. Okay, I think this gets really to your point, Commissioner, that you're making here or asking about here, and that is, what is the economic cost of property taxes to the citizens of Utah County, and what is the economic value produced for the purpose of funding general government operations? This chart, I think, does the best job of showing that. So what this is all of the property tax revenue generated by Utah County's property tax rate for general fund operations. So that's the general fund rate, the mill rate, as we were talking about earlier. And so it's instead of looking at the rate, we're looking at the total revenue generated. So in your example, about 10 million in 1985 and 40 million today. So the total property tax revenue over time. Now, the property tax revenue over time in nominal dollars, in economic terms, is less helpful than an inflation-adjusted number. So this number is inflation-adjusted. So this is saying the total dollars adjusting for inflation. So we're comparing all of these years over time to the current year. In this case, it's actually 2018. So this is in 2018 dollars, looking back over the past, in this case, we're looking at about 20 years of data here. And then doing that per capita. So saying on a per capita basis in the county, what's the economic cost total in property tax that you as a citizen are paying adjusted for inflation? And so the trend is similar to the rate chart. So what you're seeing, and if I could look more closely at those numbers, trying to think what that dollar amount is in 1997 timeframe versus today.
It's over 70.
So just over $70 per capita, inflation adjusted in 2018 versus today we're just over 40. So what that's saying is that in terms of 2018 dollars, today an average citizen in Utah County is paying a little over $40 per person towards the general fund versus back in 1997 they were paying something like $70.
So you're saying that our property tax has not kept up with inflation?
That's
That-
true. Property tax has not kept up with inflation. Sales tax has been the only saving grace for general fund operations. Yeah.
I've seen different charts, but anyway, okay.
And again, this is on a per capita basis.
I know.
Yeah, so-
You can
and so-
tell the story
Right. There
different ways.
are other economic forces in play, but that's true because if you looked at inflation and you looked at our actual revenue, they don't match. The trajectory of those lines don't match, and I think that's what you see happening with recent deficits is you're starting to feel the effects of that over time. Some of these numbers that have changed, so you'll see a pivot point in about 2007 or 8. This inflection point actually reflects the shift from ANC to the general fund that took place the year before. So you actually see a bump up because that, as I described, is essentially an economic tax increase, is what that was. You just didn't have to do a truth in taxation. There was kind of an opportunity in state code where you could make that transfer, and that was then a permanent change to the rate. And so you can see how it generated revenue over time. You know that you can kind of see that's what what you're looking at there. So let's go to the next chart. This is Utah County, the same chart you just saw, compared to every other county in the Wasatch Front, urban county. So Weber, Salt Lake, and Davis, the most comparable in terms of economies. Same data, adjusted for inflation, total real property tax revenue for the general fund, adjusted to $2018, and looking at it on a per capita basis. So what this is telling you is that the average person in Utah County is essentially paying on a per capita basis property taxes in today's dollars of whatever that number is on the far right versus our sort of neighbor counties to the north, and that's over time. And again, you can kind of see some of those inflection points represent tax increases that were levied in those counties, and some of those other sort of trajectories and inflection points can also be other economic factors playing in. So, population shifts. If you have significant changes in population, you would see declines and that sort of thing. So this chart is taking the previous chart and thinking about this comparison county to county, and because other counties, the things that they fund, the services that they fund are different than our county. So for example, in the case of Salt Lake County, they have a pretty robust county library system. And so the light blue sections of this chart are showing just the sort of general fund type operations and the property tax devoted to them. The total size of the chart is the total general fund property tax rate. It's just that other counties fund certain things within that rate. So this kind of breaks that out and shows where Utah County has compared in the past to Weber, Davis, and Salt Lake. And this is my last slide, and I'll mostly let Deneen talk about this in her presentation. This is just showing fund balance over time in terms of spending. So where the general fund expenditures budgeted to spend fund balance versus contribute to the fund balance. So in 14, you see a contribution to the fund balance. In 15, you see spending into fund balance. 16, contributing. 17, 18, and 19 projected, and our projection current to date may not be that steep, but it's still, it was budgeted and is still spending into fund balance. So that's the concept of the sort of deficit spending. The question becomes, what happened in 2016 or 17? Is this trajectory something that can change? What's going on here, right? So basically, rather than contributing to rainy day fund, our expenditures year over year aren't meeting our total revenues year over year for the last 3 years. And that's what we project will happen again in 2020 to date as we're looking at it. So, and I'll turn the time over to Deneen to talk a little more detail about expenditures in 2020.
Thank you, Josh.
Are you going to stay on this chart?
I was going to move off, but I can stay on it. It's later on in my presentation, so I'll come back to it.
Okay.
Do you want me to? Okay. Deneen Jackson, Utah County Auditor's Office. So I just wanted to present some of the financial information, actual results, where the county general fund, how it's being spent. And the first chart that I wanted to start off with is what exactly does the general fund cover? Sometimes there's some misconceptions that they'll say, why are we talking about a property tax increase? The commission approved, say, $4 million for the Provo Airport. That's a separate funding source. That's the Tourism, Recreation, Cultural, and Convention Facilities tax, which is separate from the general fund. So I've created 4 functional areas that the general fund covers. It's essentially general government, which would be the commission, human resources, the clerk auditor in the terms of finance, purchasing, the surveyor, public works, GIS. The next category is public safety, which is law enforcement, which is patrol and investigative services. And I just want to mention that that would be for the county as a total, and especially our recreational areas. The citizens of the unincorporated area are in a service area, it's Service Area 6, that they receive a separate levy to pay for law enforcement services specifically for the unincorporated area of the county. So that is not contemplated in the general property tax or sales tax collections. This also includes court security costs that the county is required to provide at the 4th Judicial District Court, and then contributions to the Utah Valley Dispatch Special Service District. Then we have a category that I'm calling the justice system, which would be the jail, the prosecuting attorneys, the justice court, the public defender, and then contributions to the Children's Justice Center. And then finally, the final category being public welfare, which would be mosquito abatement, USU Extension Services, and operating contributions to our Drug and Alcohol Prevention and Treatment Department and the Health Department, and Wasatch Mental Health Special Service District. So as you can see, when we went through that list, things that aren't included would be tourism-related items. The county's also been fortunate that they haven't used any general fund monies for roads. That's all been funded by either separate sales taxes, dedicated sales taxes, a motor vehicle registration fee, or money that we receive from the state through the motor fuel tax. It also doesn't cover assessing and collecting activities. Josh talked earlier about that. That is a separate levy. There's both a state and a local levy for the activities of the treasurer, the assessor, the recorder, and the BOE. So I wanted to go into a little bit of the definition of a structurally balanced budget. State law requires the commission to adopt a balanced budget, meaning that the revenues equal the expenses. And so when the county utilizes fund balance, that shows in the budget as a revenue source, which is a technically balanced budget. However, according to the Government Finance Officers Association, that's not a structurally balanced budget because you're using a one-time funding source for recurring expenses. And it's called one-time because once you use it, it's not available again. And so to have a structurally balanced budget, you want to have recurring revenues match your recurring expenses. One-time funds would be appropriate to use for a one-time expense. And then this is the similar chart to what Josh had shown earlier with the increase and decreases. I updated the chart to show 2019. It doesn't show it's a little bit lighter up on the TV, but it's about $3 million right now. And then the 2020 budget, as it stands without any additional asks, is about $10.5 million out of balance. I'll mention that about a month ago, the county passed a financial reserves policy whereby the general fund is required to retain 2 months' worth, which is 16.7% of the general fund operating revenues in unassigned fund balance. As of the end of 2018, the county was compliant with the policy. I think the requirement was around $12 million, and the county has currently $14 million in an unassigned fund balance. If the county utilizes about $1 million in fund balance in 2019, the county would not be compliant with that policy any longer, and that policy requires that that be addressed within the next 3 years. So, you know, not knowing where we're going to completely end in 2019, that plan to replenish the funds could become effective. Did you have any questions about this chart? 'Cause I know you mentioned it
Yeah,
earlier.
can we go back to the other
Commissioner Lee.
one,
Which,
one that Josh was on?
oh, sorry, okay.
So, I mean, I know what happened between 2016 and 2017, when there was revenues that was discontinued at over $4 million, and the expenses were not cut, which is about $2.5 million, which ironically, if you $2.5 million off that 3.1 puts us up there differently, and in 2018 puts us in the green. If you take that $2.5 million in expenses that is still being incurred, and then I don't know on this, and now these are actuals. 2017 and 2018 are actuals.
Right.
They're not projected. So it's a little hard on apples to apples to look at a projected on the actuals, because it does bounce back and forth. It's often that we see projections like this. When was this projected calculated?
So this was earlier, probably a few months ago. That's why in my chart, it's only about $3 million, because we've had some additional revenue come in that's been adjusted.
So you calculated that $3.3 million in there?
Right,
So
exactly.
that was adjusted in there?
Right,
So we can see that, you know, it says 5.2 here, but you take that 3.3 off, and that's putting us down quite a bit. And then, of course, that 2.5 that I'm talking about that continues to plague us through this, it's a whole different scenario. It looks different. The chart looks different.
right. I might also mention, I mean, you know, definitely that seems like a big ticket item was the loss of the revenue. But there were some other events that took place in 2017 that required the deficit spending. One of the big ones was an investment in the county's Human Resource Information System, or HRIS. The other big item that occurred in 2017 to the tune of $1.5 million was the change in the county's other post-employment benefits, specifically the survivor benefit, where it was changed to include a COLA and also to still be allowed for remarriage circumstances. So those were also big items that occurred during
Sure.
that year that would be ongoing items.
Sure.
The next chart that I wanted to show is just the change in staffing plan. Again, these are going to be ongoing costs or recurring costs. And mainly my point with this chart is to show that there has been growth in the employees, that it hasn't been, you know, a constant level. Like we do have additional ongoing expenses that have been approved in the staffing plan. And then what this chart shows is a per capita proportional chart of property and sales taxes.
I'm sorry to interrupt you on
sorry.
that. So
You want,
if you go back to that chart, though,
okay, sure.
because not everyone in this chart is tied to general fund.
That's true.
So, yeah.
Yeah, that's true. So this chart shows per capita on a proportionate basis. If a resident of the county pays either $1 in property or sales tax, how is that dollar being spent? So you can see starting in 2014, roughly 45% of that would be on the justice system. Then we have about another 20 to 30% that would be on public safety, another 10% on general government, and another 10% on public welfare. And so you can see how those allocations have changed over time.
One comment on this.
Sure.
I think that it's the same point, no matter what we say, that the overall, or the largest item is public safety in our justice system.
Right.
But it's debatable. You could even show that that's even a higher percentage, because a lot of these green and yellow categories, really the yellow in the general government, are services that are performed on a pro rata basis to all of the departments. And because our public safety and justice system are such a high percentage, they really represent, whatever this is, 75% of this gold or yellow item as well.
Right.
And I know we've talked about doing that in terms of charging those administrative fees to the various departments, but regardless, it's the same point. This is where most of our tax dollars are being spent.
Right. So I wanted to talk about 5 areas to focus on as a rate is being determined. The first area that I wanted to talk about is risk management. One suggestion that the auditor's office is going to make is creating a trust fund for risk management activities. Currently, the county relies on the general fund balance for lawsuit settlements, errors and omissions, things that we don't know about. The general fund is kind of our risk management fund. And so a proposal would be to move that to a separate trust fund with an annual contribution going to that fund. That would be estimated initially at $700,000. Again, that's losses not covered by the insurance. And then also another item that the county is currently experiencing is multiple cases that may involve death penalty, which is of course more costly to the county. And again, currently that general fund would be what covers that. And so those 2 items together are estimated at $1.7 million. One thing that is brought up often to the commission is the risk of jail medical costs. That is a cost that can't be anticipated. So there is $1.4 million currently in the 2020 baseline budget for jail medical costs, just so that you understand your risk exposure. The highest that that's been has been about $1.7 million. And again, it could even be higher than that. There's just no way of estimating that.
I'll make a comment about this. I mean, from my perspective, we should have an amount set aside for unknown litigation and risk management issues, as well as the known cases that we're already dealing with. And in my mind, if anything, this number is a little bit low because it doesn't really factor any of the unknown, and it's, in my opinion, a little bit low for even some of the known issues that we are currently dealing with. So I appreciate that you're bringing this in, but I mean, this is a real area. We've had exposure in the past where we have paid out close to $1 million. We do take on these types of litigation risks from time to time.
And I'm happy to update these numbers with any better information, certainly. Okay, the next area that I wanted to talk about as an area of focus is our capital needs. The county does have a capital projects fund, has about $9.5 million in it currently. And along with the fund balance reserve policy passed a month ago, there was a separate capital planning policy that was adopted, which does require a committee to be organized to formally present a capital projects plan to the commission, with that plan being approved. That would be a 10-year plan, and the first 3 years of that plan are required to be funded. So this information, of course, we don't have an adopted capital projects plan in place yet. So this information is, again, going off the best information that I could gather together, and it could be changed. But the first item is IT software and hardware maintenance and necessary upgrades. That includes getting some of our systems to be web-based instead of Power Builder-based. to make them more accessible and to have a better graphical user interface. So there is going to be some investment in software needed to make those upgrades happen. The next item that's been talked about actually in this meeting is the cost of building or expanding the administration campus here, which was about $75 to $90 million. On a debt service perspective, that would be about $5 million a year, and that could vary depending on what type of bonding was done and how long the debt service was, which the initial estimates were 20 to 30 years. Some additional capital projects plans that have at least been expressed, again, not adopted, are a motor pool / fuel station upgrade in 2020, a public works facility in 2021, Foothill, that would be substance abuse treatment facility in the north part of Utah County, and a health services building also in the north part of Utah County. When those items are added up, subtracted by the amount that's currently in the capital projects fund of $9.5 million, that's a shortfall of $12.2 million. If I divide that by 3 years, there were no projects estimated or anticipated for 2022. That's approximately $4 million a year. So the items here are $10 million.
Janine,
Yeah, sure.
a couple of comments on this. I mean, the building, you know, we had this architectural firm come in, do needs planning analysis, and they said we need to spend $75 to $90 million in new buildings or renovations. To me, that shows the other side of this equation. You know, we were talking about deficit spending in the previous slides, but it's actually worse than that, because in addition to spending into the deficits, we haven't planned for our huge capital needs, which don't really show up in the budget anywhere. And now we have this enormous expense. So ignoring problems doesn't solve them. If so, I think government would probably be in a really good position all over the country and at our federal level. But this is, now, I don't know if we need to do this. I think the commission has been working together to, I mean, we're going to have to take action in one way or another, but we've been trying to find a way to save taxpayer dollars, whether that's buying a building instead of building one from scratch, where the construction costs are so high right now compared to purchasing in the open market. The commission has moved, or in the process of moving, to the historic courthouse to allow the attorneys to expand into the existing commission chambers in this building. So we're doing everything that we can, but I think these deferred capital needs, this is why, because as you get to the end of this, I'm anticipating, before you had a $10 million shortfall. Well, that's from our operating budget that we're talking about from all the departments, but these are what is exacerbating this problem.
So, but there's been nothing agreed to on these. These are just all speculative. I mean, when we got that $90 million, proposal, it didn't go anywhere. And so we're looking at other options that were significantly less than the 90 million, all the way down to 12. So when I see numbers like this, I mean, they tell a story of shortfall, but they're a shortfall on pure speculation.
Right, and all I'm identifying is areas for the commission to consider when they're looking at creating a structurally achievable balance. If you decide that amount is zero, that's totally up to you, that's fine. Yeah, you can have that decision.
I would maybe qualify that statement, Commissioner Lee, with that $5 million item is talking about a shortfall or a gap that's related to speculation. The other items on here, while still have not been approved, my understanding before I took office, I mean, the county purchased land for this North County facility. Some of the departments have been talking about it. The IT needs, I wouldn't call those speculation, but I would agree that the overall architectural study was, there's still a lot to be fleshed out in that number.
Yeah, I mean, but it is speculation. We don't know. We don't know what the numbers are. We haven't seen a plan for it. It's just, I mean, $12 million for a public works facility. We said we're going to look at this campus first, and we're going to look at North Campus second. I mean, we could be talking down the road on a lot of these as well before we get to any thought of that. So, to tie them in and say that we have a shortfall of $12.2 million, and therefore we've got to make up that gap this year, you know, is pure speculation on it. I mean, because we're talking years out on these things. I know they have things on here in 2020 and 2021. I don't see Public Works facility being in 2021. The dates on the sides don't make sense.
Right. And again, we'll have a better idea of what the capital needs are when the capital plans project, after the committee's formed and that's presented to the commission and that's adopted. I might also suggest that administration building costs, even if there wasn't a desire or to go out and bond for a totally new building, that's probably a wise, prudent fiscal policy to be setting aside money through a depreciation charge. So even if something wasn't going to be done now and it's going to be done in the future, that money is available at a future date. So the next area to talk about is fund balance replenishment. As has been described, the last 2 years, the county has used about $5 million in fund balance. Of course, as the county's revenues grow, the capacity for fund balance, to have a higher fund balance, also increases. The reason that it makes sense to have a higher fund balance or to replenish that amount that's been exhausted is, again, that's the county's emergency fund that's going to be used in times of economic downturn. And it's also the county's risk fund for emergency type disasters or natural disasters that might take place. Of course, last year we had some fires that took place in the county that we felt the effects of the flood this year. The commission went and lobbied both the state and the federal government for funding to help mitigate the cost of those items. And as far as I know, I think that we received that funding. If the county hadn't received that funding, we need to be in a position to be able to fund those ourselves. And that would be through the fund balance. The next item is what was talked about earlier with the fund balance shortfall currently for 2020. But right now the 2020 baseline budget is out of balance by $10.5 million. Just so that everyone is on the same page of what that is, that's the forecasted revenues for 2020, which does include growth for property tax and sales tax. The growth of sales tax is about 3.5% right now. The county is at about 6.6, a little bit under 7% growth this year. It includes the 2020 staffing plan, which includes the 17 positions that were recently added to the attorney's office, and it includes an extra $2 million for other costs that may result from the increase in the attorney's office. This doesn't include it right now any capital expenditures, nor does it include the additional asks from the departments, which is the next item to talk about. So the items listed here are only the requests that impact or could impact the general fund. Other departments have requests, but maybe they're a department in assessing and collecting, or in the case of the health department, they may be bringing in revenue or grants to cover some of their expenses. So the departments are listed here. The total of those requests are $12.3 million, which again would be an addition to the $10.5 million the county is currently out of balance in the general fund. And if there are any questions, I think that I would probably turn the time over to the department heads to speak more specifically to their requests.
And I think that this meeting is not necessarily a place for them to, we're going to have all of our additional public hearings for the budget with each individual department, and they can go through line by line what those additional requests are. I think kind of to the extent that you've done, but in a much abbreviated form, this is a chance for department heads to say why additional funds in general are needed, why these types of programs are needed, how they've gotten to this point in their departments, and make the case.
Okay. And I might suggest we just maybe go in order of the list. So we'll start with the sheriff.
Commission. Good morning. I wasn't aware we were doing this until just now. So what is it that you're asking about the budget?
This is just an opportunity for you to say that if you feel like you really need the funding that you're asking for, why you feel like you really need it, in general terms. Again, we're going to have a specific budget meeting for your department.
Yeah.
But this is really a chance, kind of as we've been talking about, for each department to endorse this budget requirement.
Yeah. So as we've went through our budget, we've had in our divisions, whether it's corrections or enforcement or judicial emergency services, we've went down through many of the needs. Some are carryovers that have been needs for many years that are on there. Some of them, as we went through and they came to my level up to the sheriff, were taken off. We've tried to be as careful as we could as to the needs that we feel will move us forward. As we look at our needs, we're looking at the general, the safety of the county. Public safety is huge as we move forward as a county, as we continue to grow. I know this morning there's been a lot of talk about growth and growth over the years. And as we look forward, that will continue to grow. And public safety needs to grow with that as we provide and keep Utah County a place that, well, an amazing place to live as it is now. So the needs that we're asking for, and as we go through them specifically, are very much needed as we move forward as a sheriff's office to keep Utah County where it is today.
We appreciate everything that you do, everything that your deputies do to keep our community safe, all of the employees of your department. And we know it's critical. From your perspective, are these asks, I know you didn't take it lightly, like you said, you've asked for members of your department to remove certain requests even before you brought this.
Yes.
This is important enough for you to perform your functions in your department that even if it requires a tax increase?
Yes, they are. They are. And as I said, there are things on there that we have went without that have been asked before and will probably continue to be asked as we move forward. They're legitimate needs. And then there are other things that are very, very essential safety items that we just can't move forward without.
Thank you.
So the only question I have is then, I want to make sure, and I'm going to ask every department that comes up here, so you're for the tax rate increase?
I think it's needed as we move forward as a county, being the second largest county in the state. I think it was very telling, some of the charts that we looked at today and where we rank, that to provide the services that our citizens require, to provide a safe place to raise a family, I think that we do need to raise the taxes as we move forward.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, sir.
Richard Nance, Head of Department of Drug and Alcohol Prevention and Treatment. The request we're asking for really isn't to do anything more than to tread water for the next year. We've had some significant decreases in funding from the state level. The assumption with Medicaid expansion is that there would be a significant offset to state general fund monies that gets passed down to us. So remember, like you mentioned earlier, out of our $13 million budget, less than $1 million of that is county general fund dollars. But we've lost $1.4 million in state revenue, and the Medicaid revenue expected to backfill that has only amounted to $500,000 this year so far. One of the reasons why is Medicaid expansion gives individuals the opportunity to choose where they go, not like the capitation contract that we've operated under for so long, where they have to come to the county for services. So what that does is people will go to providers that are more convenient to them where they live. Ours are kind of bound by geography to Spanish Fork and Provo and South Orem. Most of the county population growth, of course, has been in the north part of the county, and we don't have any services up there. So we really are asking to, even with a significant increase in population growth, just maintain the system we have in place. Our job is the social safety net. So for those that don't qualify for Medicaid eligibility or other commercial health insurance, there's still a role for us to do what we do to provide treatment prevention services. So remember, the majority of these clients that come to us for treatment are coming through the criminal justice system. So they're coming through the county attorney's office, through the jail, through the district court, through the justice courts. And so we do a pretty good job at preventing and reducing future drug-related criminal behavior. You've seen some of the outcome charts that we produced. So that's the primary reason why we're asking for a $3 million revenue increase this year.
Okay, same question. So are you for or against raising the tax rate?
That's an interesting question. In terms of raising taxes in general, I would say no. But considering how this tax is levied and collected, I would say yes, because we still have to provide services for the citizens of the county. And if we don't have the funds to do that, our choices are, we have no choice, reduce services. So I think for us to maintain the services the county provides along with the population growth, I think, yes, it's beyond time that we should be raising taxes.
Okay.
If I can read correctly, it's my turn.
That's right.
First off, I want to briefly state that as you both, as all three of you know, I've been in office.
I love that you think that he actually sits above you.
He does, yeah.
He does.
I it's like a voice from heaven every time he speaks. And maybe that would suggest maybe you could, when you're gone, that's the way it is for you too. I want to say that as the county attorney, my job, one of my big jobs is to counsel with, advise, and the county commission. That's a bit of a tricky job because while it's one body, it's three very separate individuals with different perspectives, different ideologies in some forms or another, and I know that that's a challenge for the three of you as you try to do what's best for this community. I will say that what I have seen from the three of you to a person, I want to publicly state and publicly applaud that I understand that as each of you grapple with the issues that are flesh tearing and you know, and painful for you, I understand that each of you is looking at this with the public's welfare in mind. I've been impressed with your statesmanship, with your desire to serve the public, and truly, I have been left with the conclusion that for all three of you, this is not about you, but this is about doing what's best for the public. And that can be answered in a number of ways, depending on who's asking the question and answering it. And that's, and so regardless of how this budget process resolves, I'll simply state that I'm comfortable that whether I agree or disagree with where you arrive, that I completely understand your motivations and how you got there. And I applaud them.
It's kind of you to say, and we will ignore the fact that your immediately next statement is going to be asking for additional funds.
Well, you know, but don't lose sight of the fact that while it may be convenient, it is true what I just said. One of the things that frustrates me is that Utah County is a political subdivision of the state of Utah, which I have indicated before, is kind of the whipping post of the state of Utah, as is all counties, because my responsibilities in the county attorney's office are twofold, if I can generalize them. The first is to take care of the needs of the county's civil functions, and as the civil advisor to the Utah County government, it really doesn't matter which department you line up there on that list. Every department up there in one form or another flows through my office. And so the functioning of Utah County as a government depends upon my office being able to function efficiently, effectively, and with the trust of the other offices. You have recognized that, and you have taken care of me previously when you funded the additional lawyers, some of which go to my civil division. And I want to again state what a huge victory it is, not only I think particularly for the residents of Utah County, for you to have funded 15 lawyers and 2 legal assistants. That's huge. The part that's frustrating about this is that the other portion of my job is to protect this community as the chief law enforcement official for Utah County in enforcing Utah's laws. I represent the state of Utah, and as the representative of the state of Utah, it would be nice if the state of Utah would participate in funding what my duties are. And that's why I say that Utah County is the whipping post of the state of Utah, because they mandate what my job is, but they don't pay for what my job is. They require that you fund that. And that's not a funding mechanism that I find equitable. It's not a funding mechanism that I find fair, but it is a funding mechanism that I have to live with, because I have a responsibility to protect this community through how I administer the function of prosecution in this office. The average caseload in my office prior to you funding these 15 new lawyers was roughly 275 cases per year. The national average is 125 cases per year. The ideal is 95. You've allowed me to reduce that now down to roughly 150 or 160 cases per year. And while we are still above the average, those are numbers that we can work with, because we will do things in a way that's smart and efficient. One area that I am particularly troubled with is our system overall, in the sense that we need to preserve the basic underpinnings of our system by reducing the number of plea bargains we have in our society. 99.2 or 3% of every case I file, we resolve with a plea bargain. And while we're always going to have plea bargains, I'd like to, and while I'm not going to set a quota, it would be wonderful if we could reduce that number down to 90% of our cases being resolved by plea bargains, because that would make our system run better. And the funding that you've given me with these 15 new lawyers will help me do that. The thing that I want, the 2 points that I want to make here that I still need your help with specifically is my ability to successfully prosecute what is now 1 death penalty case, and what could easily likely become 2 death penalty cases in the coming year. Death penalty. There hasn't been a death penalty case in Utah County since the mid-'80s, in the Ron Lafferty case, and now we have one, which ironically occurred 1 mile into the borders of Utah County, by residents of another county victimizing residents of another county. But because it occurred in Utah County, the state requires that we pay for both the prosecution and the defense. That's a problem that I will continue to harp on, but nevertheless, it's a reality that I live with. And so what that's going to cost, we don't know. We simply don't know, and I would feel less than responsible if I threw a number out there just to say a number. But it will involve additional investigative costs. It will involve additional experts and things like that, and I think that we can just work with each other moving forward, possibly amending the budget as those needs arise. The second area that I want to, well, I said there are two, there are three. The second area that I want to hit on is my investigations bureau. We have 23, roughly, depending on how you count them, police agencies whose cases flow to my office. The primary function of my investigation bureau is to be the lead agency, as it will continue to be, on officer-involved shootings. And that's important for the public confidence, because when the public sees that a police officer has been involved in a shooting, it's important to understand that the independence of the county attorney's office is the office that's leading that investigation. That will continue. However, there are a lot of crimes in this county that require tremendous specialization. White-collar crimes, specifically computer-related crimes, sex crimes, that local agencies, for the sheer fact of their size, don't have the specialization or expertise that is necessary to follow a case from first report through prosecution. And so my budget has included 4 new investigators. One to put specifically on the death penalty case or cases, because those are animals of different stripes than other cases. And 3, to increase our ability to be a resource to the local police agencies who have white-collar crimes or specific other crimes of a specified nature. That's in the budget. I believe that is money well spent to protect this community, and money that whether you get it in one way or another, that'll be your call, not mine. But it's money that my office needs to truly take care of the needs of my office. The last thing that I will say on my needs is quite frankly an area in which my office is not doing a very good job. And that's in how we deal with our victims and our witnesses. Now, we're not doing a very good job, not because the 3 people that we have aren't excellent in what they do. They are excellent in what they do. They care about our victims. They care about the witnesses who have to show up to court, who oftentimes are one and the same person. The victim and the witness are the same person. But the sheer volume of what we deal with makes it impossible for 3 people to effectively handle. We will have come into our office in 2019 roughly 3,800 victims of crime. Every one of those victims of crime we have an obligation to them, not only a statutory obligation, but a moral and human obligation, to treat them with respect, to see that their needs are addressed, to help them get restitution, if they need restitution, to hold their hand in a process in the court that is unfamiliar to them, and to help them to understand that part of this criminal justice system is there to serve them. We are not adequately serving them because we have 3 victim and witness coordinators, and we have 3,800 cases a year. Do the math, it's just physically impossible to handle that workload. And so what occurs are that only the most serious of cases get handled. And some of the cases, I am embarrassed to look at a victim and say, well, your case isn't serious enough for us to worry about. Because every case is serious. Every case is important. But if you have, for example, a financial loss of $5,000 or $10,000 and our office is prosecuting that case, the likelihood of you ever being notified by my office is almost 0, because we don't have the people who can make the phone call to do it. Now, you've helped us tremendously with the lawyers. It's going to help. What I need to ask, and what I will continue to ask for, is for 6 more victim coordinators, so that I can have. I've got 3, and I have 9 courts. I want to put 1 victim coordinator in each of the 9 courts. that would dramatically improve our ability to serve this population. Now, to get to the question that Commissioner Lee is about to ask me, and that is whether I support the tax increase or not, let me address it this way. I support sound government practices and fiscal responsibility. It drives me crazy when governments drive the newest and the greatest automobiles. It drives me crazy when governments replace things rather than wearing things out and doing it out when necessary. And that's one that I believe is one of the hallmarks of this government in Utah County. We are not a government that has county parks that provide what many would call superfluous services and benefits to Utah County. We are a government that tries its best to live in a way that's consistent with the principles of those who elect us. And I know that we are pinching pennies and trying to do nothing in our budget that is superfluous, nothing in our budget that would be luxurious. We just can't make it work without more money. Now, my heavy lifting is to prosecute the crime in this county and to preside over this criminal justice system. Your heavy lifting is to figure out how to pay for it. I know that some of you favor a tax increase more than others. I know that some of you favor trying to find it in other county budgets. My guess is that all of that is an important and necessary tool. And I would counsel all three of you to cut where you can cut. If you can find areas in my budget where you can cut, you'll find me supportive of cutting that. Maybe I have seen some, maybe you can see something that I can't see in my budget. Maybe you can see a blind spot in my office where you can say, well, can't we do this, can't we do that? One area that I will commend you for is when I said, I have to have more space. And rather than spending $500,000 a year in space for the lawyer's office, you did a very self-sacrificing thing and said, we'll move out ourselves, thus giving us the space. I appreciate that. That wasn't an option that I necessarily saw. So if you can see something in my budget where we can cut, we are more than willing, in the spirit of team play, to do that. But as you have gone through all of these departments and you have gone through the process and counsel with us, and you can't find enough cuts to fund what we all collectively believe is necessary, then yes, I would suggest that you raise taxes. Because that combination of good government in holding us accountable in our responsibilities, that's a critical function of your component of your job. The other is to find a way to fund us, and if you can't do it by cutting, then I would suggest that you do it, by a combination of the two. Any questions from
Thank you.
any of you?
I have one follow-up, just to, on, we're looking at the slide that has all the new requests.
Mm-hmm.
And, I don't know. I know that everyone's making their case that why they need these, but there's going to be a lot of scrutiny on all of that given this process. I mean, we all see where we're at from a budgetary perspective. But even just your baseline budget, right? Even every department's baseline budget that just says the current staffing that they have with not a whole lot else, it's really primarily staffing, results in a $10 million deficit next year. And so, given the fact that you're still asking for additional resources, I would imagine that you've been through your budget and that so I'll comment, do you feel like there are any cuts in your baseline budget that you could cut from your current staffing plan?
I have already cut before I gave them to you. This is not a car negotiation for me where I say, well, I'll offer this and maybe get this. To me, part of my responsibility is to give you what I believe in good faith we need. At the same time, acknowledging that I'm not the end-all perspective as to what I need. You have a perspective that to me is valuable. But I will tell you both, all three of you, what I have told each of you privately. And that is, while I hope that you will find as much as you can to cut and to find and to trim. For example, I support selling the equestrian center. I support, liquidating assets that are not necessary to the county function. While I support all of that, I don't know how you do this without a tax increase. I don't know how you do this without a tax increase, but then again, I don't know. I'm looking at one budget. I'm not looking at everybody else's budgets. And so, I also am aware of the fact that, we have growth, we have building needs, we have a lot of things. I'm supportive of the concept of cutting. I'm supporting of the concept of a tax increase, and I'm supportive of both of those, primarily because I know the intent and the character of the three people who are making those decisions.
Thank you for your comments.
Thanks.
Josh Daniels, Clerk Auditor's Office. Our request right here, $1.8 million. Clerk Auditor are two separate statutory elected official functions. Under the clerk function, you have some public service things that we do, marriage licenses, passports. We have the election division, which is the biggest bulk of what we do. There's some support that our staff does related to county functions of commission meetings and contracts and meeting minutes and things like that. So that's the clerk bucket. And then you have the auditor bucket, which is all of the finance functions of the county. So we've got, the county budget, finance and accounting, county purchasing. We have the internal audit division. So between those two divisions, the total ask here is 1.8. A big chunk of the 1.8 is in the elections. We anticipate that the 2020 general election year, which will include 3 different election cycles. You have a presidential primary in March, you have the general statewide primary in June, and then you have the general election, including the state, county, and federal general elections in November. That all told, we're looking at close to 1 million more than previous. One of the things that's changed in elections in our county specifically was one of the last to sort of jump on board is vote by mail, universal vote by mail, where we proactively print and mail ballots to all registered voters in the county. And then, we pick up the cost of postage back to the county. And that's what all the other counties are doing. We've transitioned to doing that the last cycle and had a lot of challenges with that because you end up running a dual election where some of the benefits that you get from vote by mail, you don't see them until a couple years down the road once voters are used to it and they utilize that system. So we have to run, full-on polling locations to accommodate crowds and voters on election day, while we're also making it more convenient and hoping that they'll largely use the vote by mail system. We anticipate that they will in 2020, given some of the pain that was experienced in 2018. But a big chunk of that is from elections there. We're seeing a lot of population growth in the county, a lot of new people moving in, a lot of new voters. We have 2 universities. The footprint in terms of population or enrollment at those universities is growing, and that creates ongoing work burden for our elections office as they're constantly updating and managing voter records and voter data. Because we have that transient population, we're constantly, changing addresses for individuals and taking in new forms and changed forms. One of the things that's unfortunate about the way the voter registration system works in Utah is it's actually a very manual process. People in the community are able to change their voter registration status online, or so it seems to the user, if you've ever done that. What they don't actually realize is that one of our staff individually, manually, looks at that data and then manually changes the voter registration system. So there's always a quality control check every time those records are changed. And that's important for security because we mail ballots out to voters at the address they give us. We want to make sure that the data is good and that we're not just having some auto process that changes where we send ballots to. So a lot of that is contributing to an increased need for the clerk side of our office. Not to mention some innovations we're doing with digitizing and making some of our services available online. On the auditor's side, as has been talked about, where do we find savings? And the county attorney had some good comments about, he's looking at his budget, but he'd welcome sort of insight into maybe savings that he could find. We propose to try to do just that with our internal audit function, growing the internal audit function slightly so that we can be a resource to all the departments to help them analyze their budgets, to analyze their operations, and really just be a resource. How can we help you find savings? If that's something you want to look into, we want to make that a resource that's available to everybody in the county. Also, when it comes to the general financial operation of the county, the needs of our office grow in line with the support level that we provide to all other departments. As the county grows in population, as the demand for the services that our county provides grows, so also does the support for those services. So, for example, our purchasing department, the more purchases that take place in the county, the more assistance is needed from the purchasing department, which also then generates a work burden for the accounting department, and on and on. So that's the main driver for our budget and some of the things that we're looking at for next year. In terms of the question about a tax increase, the short answer is yes. We understand that that is a necessary thing for the county at this point in time. However, the economist in me says, what does a tax increase mean? Because we're not increasing. So if you think about your income tax, if you have the same income tax rate, if your income tax rate is 10%, but your income goes up double, you pay double in income taxes the next year, but your income tax rate remained the same. Is that a tax increase? Should as a citizen of our country, my income taxes to the federal government, should I pay a certain amount of income taxes, $1,000 a year, and I pay no more than $1,000 a year? And if next year my income doubles, I still pay $1,000 a year. If that were the system we had, that would be essentially what we have for property taxes. It'd be a similar system. So I think that changing the general levy rate for 2020, the certified tax rate, to an amount adequate to yield the revenue that you're looking at projecting, you could characterize that as a tax increase. But I think there's a little more conversation into that because the legislature did not incorporate inflation capture in the certified tax rate system. And so if you were to restore tax rates for Utah County properties to pre-year 2000 rates, that's what I would favor, So just don't, so if you do nothing, if the commission does nothing on tax rates and you say we are going to keep a baseline, we're not even a baseline budget, we're going to keep the exact same budget from this year next year, that would yield a reduction in the property tax rate next year. So I don't favor that. I favor the appropriate tax rate that equates to the revenue that will fund the priorities that you think are priorities. I think that would be characterized as a tax increase in the common parlance, but I think there's more to the discussion about how the property tax system works and what the revenue modeling has been for the county historically and what it should be in the future.
So Josh, that comment about tax rate, is that Amelia's sentiment as well? I don't know if you want to speak for her or not, but
yeah, we've talked about this. We're on the same page. She's actually meeting with one of our vendors for our print and mail because we're handling final details to send ballots out. They go out next week. But yeah, we're on the same page on this, and we've dug into these numbers, and it's really opened our eyes to look at what's happened with property tax revenue for our county specifically over time. And basically never holding truth in taxation to increase the certified rate since 1984, as far back as we can find. I don't think that's really sustainable or wise for the county's needs. unless you make some really significant changes in your level of service. I think if the county were to eliminate wholesale some of the services you provide, you could continue to forego sort of a truth in taxation process to increase the certified rate. I don't think that that's really in the cards. I think fiscal prudence requires looking at a change. And I think that that change would be a correction from years of not capturing inflation. And that's where, the longer you sort of put off a change, the bigger the difference is, and it creates really tough decisions. So,
Couple of comments about that. I mean, this is one where knowing just on a personal level some of your political views and that of Amelia and Powers, our clerk auditor, it speaks to, in my opinion, speaks to your level of professionalism and analysis that you've conducted in this process. Because I know that that would not be a decision that you make lightly. It also, in my view, does make the point that you're making in that there's a distinction that needs to be drawn between property tax and sales tax and income tax. For example, the most conservative organizations, political organizations in the state, would never support income tax increases or sales tax increases. But on the property tax level, they all acknowledge, there's not one group who would say that by letting the rate go down year after year by taking no action, that that's a sustainable path. At some point, it gets to zero. And there's an acknowledgement there. Even the Utah Taxpayers Association acknowledges that they don't say that these shouldn't be adjusted because they know it goes down with no action. But their typical recommendation is that you operate on a fiscally disciplined manner with a lot of restraint on a conservative basis, and every 4 to 6 years, there's an adjustment. And you go back to the people and you go through it. They will say that, they helped implement this law. And, the idea was not that you should never go to your residents and make your case. The idea was that you need to do that and you need to make the case. But they have actually regretted that as a consequence, some politicians have just been scared to ever go make the case. And as a result, the counties or the municipalities have suffered. And so I appreciate the points that you made and all of your efforts in making this presentation.
yeah, thanks. Personally, politically, I despise taxes. Who doesn't, right? You're taking money out of my pocket. But in some ways, our hands are tied, and we've seen this in our own office. We've said, look, we have these statutory requirements handed down by the legislature to perform certain services for the public. And if we don't perform those services, we can be sued. And in fact, we have been sued, over disputes about the performance of those services. I don't know that we have a specific example where, because of resources, we neglected to do something and we got sued, but that's a possibility. And so we don't have a choice in performing these services. And that costs money to do that. And we've tried to find ways to do them efficiently in ways that save money. We've looked at our fee schedule to ensure that the public who is benefited by a specific service pays the cost of that service. And I think those are wise things that we've done generally across the county and should continue to do, but I don't see a lot of way out of some of these things.
Josh, Commissioner Ivey, I just wanted to thank you for your comments here recently and for even in the beginning of the presentation. It's clear that your office has done a great deal of research. You've been diligent in this manner. And I love the approach of your office. You approach it with the correct principles, with sound financial management in mind, and a realization that none of us like taxes and certainly are not a proponent of them having to be raised. But I loved your analogy with the income tax, right? If your income goes up and the percentage doesn't stay the same and you pay the same amount, is it a tax increase or not? I think that's a critical part of this conversation, and I just appreciate your office's efforts in this and for all of the hard work that you've done. So I just wanted to make sure I expressed that to you and to all of the departments. As I've met with my individual portfolios, they've been diligent in looking at places to try and save and documenting and saying, look, here's how we're falling behind because of this rapid growth, and unfortunately that rapid growth isn't paying for the increased demand on the service. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Commissioner.
I'm just going to double down on that as well, just to, this presentation represents a lot of work for many months to get to this place, but there's also a lot of other pain points that the clerk auditor's office has really spearheaded throughout this year. I see Robert Baxter in the room, and from a purchasing standpoint, we have changed policies. We've added some additional resources to make sure that purchasing is improved and is streamlined, and I know that's been a huge undertaking. Deneen Jackson, who presented, has done an incredible job as our budget officer, and a lot of this analysis, is through painstaking effort with each and every department kind of holding their hand through the process of coming up with what's needed. And she's also initiated a couple of key issues here that have led to this presentation, which are, one, outcome-based budgeting, which that's not really been introduced here, but it's something that we're doing where each one of these asks, as the departments have met with the commission and as they will meet with the commission, are tied to specific outcomes that they want to achieve. And then those are going to be measured to make sure that they actually are achieved. So also the audit function is going to be improved. I think there's a commitment that each and every department will be subject to a regular and formal audit. And then the last one is a multi-year budgeting process, making sure that we can't unintentionally kick the can down the road, that we actually are looking multiple years. And yeah, has part of that made this conversation more necessary? It has. But it's also put us in a situation where we can do the right thing and govern effectively. So I'm grateful for all of the services of the department. And of course, Amelia, who's not here, has led all of that, and she's done an incredible job. And commissioners, I don't know about you, we have more on the list. We've been through the vast majority of the line items.
I think we should,
We should have
do
every
like a 1 minute or something instead of.
1 minute and still
instead
have
of
everyone else go
15.
through. Okay.
Yeah, I thought I was off the hook for a second. Patrick Worrell from the IS department. I can't believe I'm fifth on the list. I thought for sure we would be further down, but it adds up. I guess I'd like to echo a lot of things Josh says. As information systems department, we are a service department, which means as different departments grow and they feel those growth pains, a certain part of those growth pains are transferred to us in an effort to help them meet their mandates and their scope of work, at least in relations to computers and information systems. As I reflected on this, I have several divisions. There's a couple of things. A GIS division is a strictly general fund division of mine. The rest of us are in an internal service fund. The GIS division, essentially, we budgeted as a no-growth, essentially as a no-growth division this year. So there's not really any additional burden on the general fund coming from that division. But as I look at the other groups, when I was doing some research, in the early 2000s, we were essentially the same size department as we are now. We had 12 developers in like 2005. And today, we actually have 9. Because 3 of our developers are specifically now assigned to the sheriff's office, and a couple of others have moved over to the GIS group. The workload of the 9 remaining has not diminished, as you could imagine. I think our reliance as a society and as a government on computers and information system has clearly grown over that period of time, and yet my staff level hasn't changed at all to meet that growth. We are feeling the pains now, particularly as I have gone around in the first few months of my new position and met with most every department. Departments aren't asking for less. They are coming with wish lists, things they would like us to do better, the things they would like us to do anew. Technology is always changing. We need to stay on top of it. And I am no longer able to divide literal programming hours any further. So when a department comes and asks for more of my staff's time to develop something, it literally would have to come at the cost of my commitment to serve another department, which makes things difficult. So the majority of what you're seeing of the increase are additional staff and additional network server infrastructure to serve the things, the programs that we are currently doing or plan on doing in 2020. Any questions?
Yep, you know my question.
Oh, sure. Well, like you say, the majority of my staff is not general fund. However, even though I'm an internal service, general fund indirectly funds my department's activities. One of the pain points I see from departments when they ask me for things is that they don't have adequate budget to pay for them. So to the extent that they would ask for more, I don't believe we see even a true demand given the ask, because there isn't money to pay for the development of those projects. So I would say, to that extent, I support some increase in the tax revenue. However you come up with that, at least to cover those costs associated with this internal growth. I also am a taxpayer. I live in Orem. I've lived in Orem for 21 years. I'm familiar with how hard it is to raise a family and pay your taxes. So I say that with somewhat, I say that carefully, because I know that I've been blessed with a steady job over the years, and I know that not everyone has been. So raising taxes might be, and certainly is a higher burden for some than others. But as an effort to really provide the services we've been asked to provide, both directly to my department or indirectly through other departments, I don't see another way. So yes, I guess I would say I tacitly support that.
Thanks.
Any
other questions?
I can see that my idea of 1 minute and others' idea of 1 minute's a lot different.
Should we go with the 30-second version for the rest of these
Let's
departments?
try the
and make
30-second
room?
version.
Okay, thank you, Patrick.
30-second version.
All 30-second versions. In fact, I'd like to do a filibuster and steal everybody else's 30-second.
I can turn your mic off.
My asks there revolve around requests for 3 positions. And I would suggest further that with those 3 positions, if we're successful, we'll still be your smallest department. I think we'll be your smallest department in perpetuity. And a lot of that has to do with the with what we've been able to do and how we've been able to do that. We've involved technology where we can. We have a history of going back, clear back in the 1940s, and how the county surveyor functioned back then. We've taken the best of what he did, incorporated what he did, and on forward. And that, coupled with the technology, has helped us be efficient. The primary thing that's requiring this right now is the fact that with Senate Bill 104, which is modified provisions in the county surveyor statutes, as well as another item on the horizon that is going to be federally mandated. It has, I think, Commissioner Lee, you've heard about this, the new 2022 datum. The state of Utah is going to be required to comply with those mandates, and as a political arm of the state, we've got to get on board with that. And you know, whatever the federal government says isn't always the best case scenario, but in this case, I think this new datum is going to be a blessing to the citizens of the county, the property owners, and how we manage the county surveyor's office. So anyway, I know my 30 seconds is up 30 seconds ago, but
Yeah, you're good, thank you.
anyway.
No, keep going, whatever
All
you
right,
need.
okay. So I know nobody gets up out of bed and decides, you know, golly, you know, I'm excited for tax increase today. And certainly if the attorney wants to give up 3 employees, 3 new attorneys, and we train them, I'll take them. I don't care. I don't care where that money's found, whether it's through a tax increase or where it's found. But I have to have those positions to perform what the citizens of the county have asked me to do. I can't protect property rights. I can't protect the public land survey system. It basically is the founding principle behind our whole entire tax system. That's got to be preserved. GIS mapping, what the recorder does, what the assessor does, how we define boundaries on the ground, everything hinges on what we do. So that's my response to the tax increase question.
Okay.
Any
You
questions?
do care where we find it from, I'm sure.
Well, yeah, just, you know, I want to do my job, Bill, and that's all I care about. I want to be able to serve the citizens. If that requires a tax increase, then so be it. Now, before I go today, I want to give you two a copy of this. I sent my portfolio commissioner this morning, so I want to share this with you. It's similar to some of the other graphs that you've seen earlier today. It'll show some revealing things, so anyway.
Thank you.
Gary Ratcliffe.
Okay, is that it? Oh, no, it came back up. Oh, us. Okay, go ahead, stand up there. You can advocate for it.
We're going to have to support this here in a few minutes when it comes back up. I
Yes,
will
we'll
say
see.
that some of our new requests, though, I mean, one, I'll talk about this at some point, but we have actually worked really hard this year to find a lot of cuts. And even in our own smaller department have found hundreds of thousands of dollars to cut. And some of this is reallocating some of those funds into next year's budget. And a consistent theme that we're hearing is, yes, we might need to do something to address the revenue, but also unfunded mandates and other state requirements are part of the problem here. And so a big chunk of our new requests relate to grant writing and lobbying so that we can make sure that we're getting appropriately taken care of at the state level. So I think that's going to be money well spent.
Okay, human resources.
Ralph Barnes, Human Resources. So, attracting, retaining the best engaged employees is what HR is all about here at the county. You've heard from many of the departments. I think the departments in general have been doing less or more with less for a long time. Most of my asks have to do with training and developing our employees. The asks that we've asked for are not necessarily for the HR department. They're actually for the benefit of the county, primarily to provide learning opportunities, learning management, training development of our employees. If we want to attract and retain the very best, it's something we need to do that we don't do a very good job of right now. There's very little of that. There's not a system in place to track or administer that. So I do feel strongly that the ROI that we would actually get, even though $200,000 is a lot of money, it's a small number in relationship to what I think we would actually get in return for the county. Again, the intent is to make sure that we are able to recognize, the performers of the county and hold those accountable who are not. And we can't, do that effectively without our leaders and our employees understanding their expectations and what they can do as far as, liability standpoint, compliance, and that, again, is something we haven't done a very good job of. So that's really is the crux of what I'm asking for is systems that we can have in place to train and develop our employees to a much higher standard. I do intend to help our leaders hold employees accountable who are not satisfying the expectation, and then those who are doing a very good job, hopefully they'll see some sort of recognition for that. The last thing is the way we've administered, compensation in the past as far as, survey studies and, COLAs, I found to be very inefficient and expensive. One of the programs I've asked for is a more improved way to do an analysis of our, compensation on a real-time, targeted basis, where I think that each year we can do a much more effective job of compensating all the employees fairly, but also accurately. And as far as, the tax increase, with everything we've heard today, the evidence that's been, presented, I think that, the HR department is in favor of that, although just like everyone else, we don't like to see those, taxes increased, but, I think it is necessary at this time.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. A couple of comments, just because I've had the chance to work with you more closely. I appreciate what you're doing. I know that there's a part of this that is, as we talk about having a culture of excellence in the county, which I think every resident of our county would want to know, that their government workers are in a culture of excellence. Part of that is making sure that employees who do not live up to that standard don't always have a home here. But the other part of that is those who do have, perform great services and are part of the culture of excellence are recognized, are fairly compensated. And so I appreciate that I know for a fact, sometimes an HR professional can only do one side of that equation. But I think that I appreciate the way that you're trying to manage that department in a responsible way for the improvement of the entire county. The other thing you didn't bring up is there are some historical compliance issues that, we won't get into all the weeds of this, but that still requires a significant amount of man hours and outside consulting hours that are eating up resources that could be used for good things in your department, and they're just fixing clerical errors that create some real liability from the past. So that's a perfect example of the amount of time that we're spending to correct errors of the past is another example for me of if you delay things and you kick the can down the road, it doesn't solve the problem. In fact, you might end up spending more money to fix it.
I can say that's 100% true in our case.
Thank you.
Is there any questions?
No, thank you.
Questions?
Okay.
Rebecca Martell, Children's Justice Center. I talk pretty fast, so I think I can stick to 30 seconds. The funds that we're asking for are really to just fund 2 positions, and this will allow us to do 2 things that we are not currently doing that we really need to be doing in our county. The first would be to hire an assistant director to oversee opening a satellite Children's Justice Center in North County. We have all seen the growth in North County. Based on our research, we're seeing that there's 150 child victims that are underserved right now. And so that is a need. We have to do this now. My hope is that in the future, the county will build on, the property out in Saratoga Springs, and in 2 to 3 years, we can have a co-located facility, but we really need to open the satellite now. The other position would be an assistant clinical coordinator position, and 2 years ago we started a pilot program with Safe and Healthy Families up at Primary Children's Hospital to do trauma screenings on children, and not only screen the trauma but also suicide risk. And unfortunately, what we're seeing at the Children's Justice Center is that 50% of the child victims that come through are at some kind of suicide risk. And right now, we only have 1 staff that's doing that, so we're not able to even screen half of the children that come through the center. So I feel like this is something, again, it's a need we have right now. And to answer your question, Commissioner Lee, if it allows me to better serve the child victims in our community, then yes, I am for raising taxes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for everything you do.
Commissioners, thank you for your time. I appreciate Commissioner Ainge's invitation and department head meeting to have us take some time during this meeting. And I'll try to be as brief as I can. The good news is we're the 2nd largest department in the county, but our requests are not the 2nd largest in the county. So I guess
That's
that's the good news. I did take the opportunity last time when we had truth and taxation hearings to attend all the hearings. As a department head, I thought I needed to hear what our citizens had to say. I guess I could have guessed what they had to say, but it was clear that nobody in the county is campaigning for paying more taxes. But understanding that, as local health departments across the state, we try to compare our costs for the core public health services and the tax funding we get. To do so, we have to take some things out to make sure we're trying to compare apples to apples, or at least Golden Delicious to Red Delicious, as it's hard to standardize everything. But as we look at that, for example, some health departments do all of the aging services in a county, or some do all the substance abuse services, some even do all the mental health services in a county. For us, when taking those out, for us, we have to take out things like our healthy lifestyles for the county employees, mosquito abatement, and senior services to try to get an apples-to-apples basis. I'll just go through some of these rather than all of them in the interest of time. But Utah County, on a per capita basis, gets $3.84 per capita for core public health services. Summit County gets $75.32 per capita for public health services. Wasatch County, $23.56. Salt Lake County, $11.67 per capita. Davis County, $14.91 per capita. I could continue, but in the interest of time, again, statutorily, the health department's required to provide services in both the incorporated and unincorporated areas of the county. Our services are then impacted by the growth that we experience throughout the county, as you've heard from many others today, and I appreciate all those presentations. But we continue to be conscientious. In 1991, we had 4 employees in our administrative services for the health department. In 2019, we have 4 employees in our administrative services for Utah County. I know many of the other departments in the county, due to the growth, have had to increase their administrative services and personnel. And I appreciate that, and that's appropriate. With the demand now that's increasing in our audits for our grants and some of the things we're experiencing there, it's a little bit of a crack for us, but we'll continue to do the best we can. But most of our requests are funded by grants or some fee increases, has been noted. The exceptions are the one you have up there for mosquito abatement. The growth of the county into new areas which were previously untreated for mosquitoes because they weren't near enough populations to treat has changed. We're having to treat more areas of the county, and it looks like that's not going to slow down at all as the growth in the county goes into those areas. Recently brought to my attention when I was at a relative's home in Vineyard and looked how close their home was built to Utah Lake and the area between their home and Utah Lake, which was basically impossible for us to get in and treat for mosquitoes because you'd either have to run through somebody's alfalfa field and smash it down to get staff in there. You couldn't do it with air service because you'd be buzzing their homes. Even drones probably wouldn't work too well as you have to have a line of sight, so you'd almost have to be standing on their homes to do it. You could get in with an airboat, but of course we don't have an airboat. So areas that we need to treat continue to expand and continue to be more challenging to get to and time consuming to get to. And at the same time, the cost of insecticides and professional services continue to increase in that area. The other area I'll just focus on briefly, environmental health scientists. As we look at Salt Lake County, for example, in Utah County we have 14 environmental health scientists who are in the field. Salt Lake County, which is not quite double our size, has 63 doing the same services in protecting our safe drinking water, proper wastewater disposal, food services, safe food, safe swimming pools, proper handling of used oil, tanning facilities, school inspections, and the many things that they do, even from complaints about rat infestations to bat bites to animal feces, etc., that they have to deal with in our communities. But But again, those are the things we have concerns about. Our concern is very similar as far as the county on the use of surplus. Surplus only lasts so long, and as you have, fortunately, we do have some attrition and sometimes some extra fee collections that help with that. But again, in that type of deficit spending, it seems to catch up with you sooner or later. Any questions I can answer, Commissioner? Okay, thank you.
Richard Nelson, Public Works Director. I'm kind of nice to see that we're down towards the bottom of the list. Of course, our general fund direct funding source is a fairly small part of our department. Biggest share of ours is internal service funds, and we have some others that are funded through other sources like Danita mentioned earlier in her presentation, our B-Road funds and such like that. Our asks are mainly centered on equipment and technology to help us do our jobs more efficiently. In the 11 years that I've been here at the county, we've always heard the recurring theme of do more with less. I think that as a county, we do that very well. When you look at how we compare to other counties, we do a lot, and we do it with considerably less people than our counterparts along the Wasatch Front. I think that we are looking to have the best possible outcome for the county taxpayers at the lowest possible cost, and I believe that's true countywide. And I guess to answer your question, I don't want to pay more taxes as a taxpayer, but I do believe this is something that is overdue, and I think it is time for us to consider raising taxes. Any questions for me? Thanks.
I'm Hallie Ninoke from Records Management. I am asking for $20,000 because we have approximately about 7,700 rolls out at the Record Center of film. And we used to have two readers and printers, but the recorders broke, and so they took ours. It's downstairs. But that thing is so ancient and so obsolete, and you can't find them anymore. And if you heard the printer, it's scary. It is dying. And there is such a need to digitize all the film. Unfortunately, the state mandates that we still have film because it's the thing that lasts longest. But for our general everyday purpose, we need to digitize. We could buy a machine for $70,000. But I know that's hard to come up with. Or we can have the state digitize 500 rolls of film a year, and it's $40 a roll approximately. And that's why we're asking for this, because we feel it's really necessary with our decrepit machine to digitize this. And as far as wanting taxes raised, as a single mom for a long, long time, I believe that it has been needed for a long time, and I think it's necessary.
Thank you, Helene.
Okay.
Thanks. All right.
I think Josh
I will
still has
look
some
at
more.
So we're just going to cap off our part of the presentation,
okay.
and then kick it over to you for more discussion and those kinds of things. So let's see here. What's our next slide? Oh, so I just wanted to go back real quick because there was some question about inflation. So in the example of the sort of traditional, single-family home in Provo that I had used earlier, going back 20 years, so back to 1998 versus last year, 2018, when we have a complete year of data. What you see here, this chart shows you the value of the taxes paid by that particular, this is an actual case. So it took an actual home, it hasn't changed, and they paid about $73 to the county portion of property tax in 1998. And then I said, okay, how much did they actually pay in county property tax over time? And if we adjust that for inflation, what does that look like? So the red line, the top line, is how much they actually paid in nominal dollars to the county year over year over year. The blue line is if you adjust for inflation, what that means. What that represents is over time a reduction of about 30% of the value, the economic value in inflation adjusted terms that this particular homeowner paid in county property tax to the county. So today that top line number is $95.62. That's 2018. That's the end of the chart. If you look at adjusting for inflation, what I'm saying is that the $95 that they pay today only purchases $61 worth of goods. If you look at what's happened to inflation, so that kind of picture shows property tax in Utah does not keep up with inflation unless you actually adjust the certified rate to capture inflation. The difference for our budget is sales tax. So how do we make up the difference? Well, I think there's two things. One, we're not making up the difference. And two, to the degree that we are making up the difference, we're making up for it with sales tax. Sales tax as a rate the rate doesn't float like property tax, but the sales tax revenue is highly dependent on economic activity. So in a good economy, you'll get more sales tax. In a bad economy, you'll get less. What that does for your government expenditure expectations is they're a little more volatile because they're based on sales tax revenue, which is why the property tax rate is an important piece of the sort of government funding puzzle. So I just wanted to bring that slide up to show some more data. And this is something I actually really enjoy, this sort of economic analysis. Would love to kind of continue that conversation if you want to. Maybe we can meet and kind of dig into a lot of numbers and kind of get into that. But that's what that slide was. So now this slide here is a total of everything you just heard. So all of the various requests and the different things that we've talked about. So what this is what is the total scope of potential expenditure increases next year that you should be considering? And that's what this number is. So this doesn't actually take into account Commissioner Ainge's point about what is the right amount of risk management money to set aside. If there was even higher risk than the ones we talked about, this assumes $1 million in judicial and attorney costs, particularly related to capital offense defense, and then $700,000 in more general civil risk. But depending on where you come in there, but the total would be $36.5 million. That would correlate to a 2020 certified rate of 0.001528. If we go to the next slide. So what does that mean for property tax rates in 2020? What does that mean for, how you set the rates and your truth in taxation process? So with a proposed budget increase of $36.5 million, the total projected general fund property tax revenue in 2020 would be $65 million. And that would impact rates accordingly here. So you're looking at the 2019 current certified rate for general government. You can add the ANC on. If you add the ANC, then that's the total in parentheses. In 2020, the proposed rate for $36.5 million would be the 1528 if you added the ANC, which the ANC is not changing unless you want to change the ANC rate. I mean, again, the commission would set the ANC rate, but assuming no change to the ANC rate, the total there would be 1686. So that's a net increase to the rate of 856 in the rate, which represents 127%. And then if you look at the impact there on residential and commercial for the house of average value, which I think was 322 or 233, that's what those numbers. So this and others would be what would go on the sort of the postcard. How does that rate compare to our urban Wasatch Front counties? Davis, Salt Lake, and Weber. So that's looking at their general government rate. This is not including their ANC rates or our ANC rate. So our rate would be, if you went this direction for 2020, the 1528. Davis has got a 1562, Salt Lake 1632, Weber 2007. So that caps off the information that we had to share with you. Any questions that we can answer?
So am I reading this right, that essentially we could have a 127% increase in our county rate and still be the lowest of urban Wasatch Front counties?
That's correct.
Still lower than Davis County and quite a bit lower than Salt Lake and Weber.
Yes.
Okay. And that the average homeowner would go from paying $156 annually in their Utah County portion of the property tax to $318 annually.
That's correct.
Okay. Thanks again for that presentation.
Yep.
Okay. Well, we'll bring it up here for discussion or a motion.
I have some comments. You know, as all of the departments came up and there was unanimous support for this, it reminded me of one of the most frustrating dynamics this year, which is I believe in the principle of accountability. And there were a couple of scenarios where we had an issue with a county department. And I would expect to have just an honest dialogue about, okay, how did this issue come up? How do we fix it? And for the most part, I think we have great department heads. We have great leaders in our county. But on a few different occasions, there were conversations that essentially went like, they threw their hands up and said, I've been telling the county for years, the county commission for years, that we can't do our job on this budget. And they've ignored our requests over and over again. And so now it's not my fault if I don't do my job well, it's the county commission's fault. And that's a pretty toxic culture. That's a toxic culture that I hope doesn't continue at all anymore. I don't really appreciate those types of comments. I don't think it's productive or helpful. And yet, if it's a reality, it's hard to hold managers accountable if you haven't given them the resources to do their job. And so on that front, I'm appreciative of the collaborative process that we've had, the outcome-based budgeting that Deneen is helping to introduce, because in this way we can actually demand a level of excellence. And next year, if the departments get an increased funding, now we can demand the level of service that people are requiring. And I do get phone calls from time to time, also from residents, saying that they are really disappointed with certain elements of our level of service. And so I think every department head has also said they were willing to do more with less. But at some point that runs out. And I've felt the exhaustion of each department head throughout this year, and I hope that in this process they can see that we're doing our best to provide the resources to the county to just provide our essential government function, which I think that's all people are asking. And there are some instances where we are not in compliance with even state law, and to me that is the most basic level that we have to fund. Another difficult thing this year has been, for me, I was elected in January or took office in January, and so we had already budgeted into the reserves. So we were looking like this was going to be a year ending in deficit spending no matter what. And so that left me with no choice. It wasn't until this time of year that we were allowed to talk about balancing the budget in future years or adjusting the revenue. And so all year long, I've had a hat on that is find areas that we can cut. And that's been really frustrating for some. I've received hundreds of emails from residents of our county that are concerned that I'm trying to cut services that they care about. I've received a lot of frustration from longstanding vendors and contractors of the county. And in some cases I have cut, and not just cut, but completely eliminated entire services or functions. And I think that's what the residents expect of us, is that we do that. And yet, at the end of the day, that number that's been saved through all of those difficult conversations is still less than $1 million. And now we're looking at these numbers that our clerk auditor's department has served up, and the increases are so much outweigh those cuts. Now, do I regret those? Not at all. I think that that's important. We continue to find cuts, and you try to make government more effective, but I'm not seeing any other path that cuts alone are not going to fund into 2020's budget. So I appreciate, again, all of those who have spoken to make this case on this. I think it really helped me understand this better, and hopefully it helps the public and everyone involved understand the predicament that we're in.
I'll comment briefly. Commissioner Ainge, I appreciate your thoughts, and Commissioner Lee, I'm sure excited to hear yours. Thank you to all the department heads, especially for the work they do. The biggest thing I'd emphasize is I am grateful to be a citizen of Utah County and a representative of Utah County because we keep our government services essential. And as I look at the things we do, I believe they're essential services. And unfortunately, we're growing so fast, I don't feel like the growth is paying for itself. We find ourselves in the exact same position we were last year. We'd hoped for a different outcome, but here we are. And I think that at some point you have to, when principles collide, like deficit spending and not wanting to raise taxes, you have to make a difficult decision. And I'm ready to make a decision that I feel is very fiscally responsible and in the long-term best interest of the citizens of this county so that we can continue to provide those essential services.
Okay. Well, I have a completely different take on it. I've watched this process engineer itself to get to a certain outcome. And even with the comparisons that we have in here, it looks like even some of the funding that we have that are short term to meet a certain area in which we've passed a policy for is added up and increased in here in saying that we need this all now, right now. We need it all right now. And if we do that, it'll continue. So when we say we need $5 million more, and that's projected into the tax rate increase, so that's every single year that's going to continue, and all those others too. I mean, there's a lot of things that are concerning as I look to the presentation. This is the first time that I've actually seen this presentation, so it's I have to run through it and digest it. I'm going to be voting no on this. 120% tax increase is unbelievable, and I think that it's going to be an interesting process to see how it goes. I'll just say this: I don't really have an appetite for balancing the county budget on the backs of the taxpayers' back if we don't first, and there was a little talk to this, the commission doesn't first have the courage to hold the departments accountable. Second, if we don't have the courage to project revenues on the projected revenues and hold that accountable. Third, have the courage to find efficiencies, and probably fourth, have the courage to cut programs that are losing money or not fulfilling their purposes or missions. And fifth, have the courage to sell unutilized properties. Six, have the courage to address vehicles and the use of vehicles in this county. If we're not willing to go through and start, and I think these are first, that we do that. If we're ignoring those, and then we're going to balance the budget on the backs of taxpayers who are going to pay a price. I know Gary says that he'll, anything that will, whatever it takes to make this work. But I'm sure that if we came and said, well, we're going to do it on your retirement, that'd be a whole different conversation. So I'm going to be voting no, and I think I have an obligation to present a different side and a different thought to it, which I will prepare and present it at the appropriate time.
So, couple things. There was no motion, so there hasn't been a proposal. So,
right, but
what,
I'm just signaling that.
So you just know.
If-
So let me ask you a
I'm not
more
reading
simple
the tea
question.
leaves in it.
How do you intend to fund the 2020 budget?
I'll get that proposal for you on how to do it.
Well, there's a couple of problems with that. One is we have a statutory requirement to provide notice if there's going to be any sort of rate adjustment. The other problem is you've already approved the 2020 budget. I mean, you've approved increased spending in 2020 already, but you just haven't identified how we're going to pay for it.
Well,
That burden's on you
no,
if we want to be fiscally responsible.
no, I haven't approved the 2020 budget. What part of the budget have I approved?
Well, I mean, 2 weeks ago, we had our county attorneys ask for a new expense that was going to be a $2.5 million increase onto the 2020 budget. And you voted for that.
I did.
And we've sat through at least one public meeting on the budget, and I haven't heard you indicate that in terms of the baseline budget, that is resulting in a $10 million shortfall, according to Deneen, that there's any cuts in that you see.
Well, no, there was plenty of cuts that I proposed that are there, and there's more that can be done.
So I have not heard of one net cut proposal from you or anyone else. I'm happy, I'm thrilled to hear any cut. In fact, I have voted for any proposed cut up until this point that any commissioner has proposed. And I've proposed additional cuts that no one has voted for. But here you're saying that you're going to get to it.
Did you?
This is the deadline.
It's not a deadline. Did you hear me say I wanted a 1/3 cut in the vehicles in our motor pool?
I didn't hear 1/3, but I heard you say that you wanted to cut in the motor pool. So, okay, so that's example. Do we know how much that's going to cut?
Well, I mean, we're working on that to see where that's at. I'd like to see a reduction in the jail population according to what we're doing when it comes to the attorney side. That's the reason why I was willing to go there and to go to that point, because I think that we can get a 25% reduction in the jail population. That's about $9 million.
Okay, but so first of all, we can't really control. We can control the budget of the sheriff, but it's his responsibility for public safety. But more importantly, even if there was a cut there, that takes some time to implement, right?
Right.
So how is that going to pay for expenses starting in January of 2020?
Well, budgets aren't all spent January 1st. Budgets are spent throughout the year. This $10 million in the sense of this property sale that we have, or possibly whatever that comes out to for that property is another one in there. There's an offset on that, but we're not looking at that to have that into the equation. Again, that will happen if it happens next year. So we have to go through the process to get there. The argument they have here with inflation, the Taxpayers Association disagrees with that. I've talked with them.
It's not true. I've spoken with them as well, and they don't disagree with that on the property tax side.
I've talked with them as well, and they said it's kept up. So there's a conflict on some of that. Some of the. I mean, you can word it in such a way to get an outcome to it, but there's overall as well. So those are discussions we're going to have. We've had our first meeting. This is kind of our second meeting. So we've got a lot more meetings and a lot more work to do.
So do you think that you're going to be able to find enough cuts to balance? I guess the question is, what do you think the 2020 budget looks like? And how are you going to fund that? Because to get to a balanced level, you're talking about 10 million, 12 million in cuts, at least.
Okay?
So do you think you're going to get there on cuts
And
alone?
we have the sale of the property, which could be what?
The sale of property, I'm not sure the value, but let's just say that could be that amount. My understanding is that's going to take 9 months. I've also understood that sale of the property, best financial practices, you don't use one-time resources to fund ongoing expenses. So, that's one thing if we were using that to pay for our Provo campus or something, but not to pay the bills on our government operations.
And then we have, when we look at those charts and we see where we started to dip into the red, a big part of that was that the sheriff's department came to us and took out $4+ million in revenue without any offset in expenses, zero. And without that, if we put that $2.5 million into those prior years, it's a whole different looking chart that's there. Plus this year too. There's $2.5 million on that. So, I mean, but we're not considering that. We're throwing a chart out there that says, oh, it's deficit spending. So I'm saying that if we don't have the courage to have management actually look at these things and hold it accountable, we're going down a whole path of saying 125% tax increase. I don't think the people in Utah County are going to appreciate that at all. I look at, some of the single moms, and you're going to be forcing some people out of their homes. That's going to happen.
So this is just purely political, and I think you're ignoring math and you're ignoring basic economic principles.
We had $15 million out of balance last year. But we went back and we trimmed it. We haven't even gone through a trimming process. This is showing a scenario of everything.
Well, yeah, but that was what they were proposing. It's up to us to decide what we're comfortable. So that's why I'm asking you, how do we want to fund it? And, you talked about courage, but you talk about the ICE contract. Commissioner Ivey and I were not there for that. Sheriff Smith was not there for that. You're the only one who was there for that.
I've been talking about this every year.
And when you talk about courage, last year I attended the property tax hearings, and last year your comment was, let's just wait and see. Let's not raise taxes. You did not identify in the public meetings any specific cuts. Now you're telling the same thing. You want to wait and see. And you're talking about courage, but you haven't put one cut on the table.
Oh, my heavens.
And you're not willing to do what we need to do to fund our government.
No, Tanner, listen. Last year when we had this conversation, we were looking at a chart and the graph was going up. We spent less last year out of the reserves than we did the year before. And we were going in a direction that, according to the analysis that we had, if we were able to hold the line, we would see ourselves get to a point to where we're not in this deficit spending, if you want to call that, or although we have surplus that covers it. But still, it keeps going, we keep spending, and now we're looking at it and saying, oh yeah, our proposed budget on this thing is way out of line, but the proposed hasn't even been reconciled according to the actual. We don't even know where we're at. We're saying 3 million or 5 million, but now we have the $3.3 million that's in there. So it's all speculative, and we're saying this is a worst case, the sky's falling scenario. We need to raise taxes 127%, or whatever that number is.
First of all, I haven't recommended that at this point in time, but this is what this conversation is for, is what we want to do. Now, you've picked little bits and pieces of a whole entire presentation that you think there's some wiggle room on, or there's speculation. And I don't disagree with all those points. I think that in that number, there's a lot of things that we can pick apart and say, we can do without that, we can do without that, we can reduce this. But the question still remains, how are we going to fund it? And you have not provided a solution of how we're going to fund our government in 2020.
Well, that will come. That will come with a full plan on this, because I wanted to see what was going to come out of this. At one point in time, we were talking $6 million, possibly $6 million. We haven't been in these discussions together. You've been, behind the scenes working out all these numbers and everything. And so here's the proposal that comes forward.
Well, I've worked with all of our departments. We've all worked separately because of public meeting laws. It's not like we can negotiate these things.
I mean, the only numbers that I saw out there was a 6 million, possibly a 10, and then, now these others are going in there. Like I'm saying, you're trying to fund areas in which there could be one time to get us in compliance with the codes or policies that we already put in place, but you want to fund the whole thing up front. There's no reason, if we've got a hole, that we can't take time to dig out of it too. We could do it over a period of years to get there with holding the line. We know we're at 3.2 possibly on projections. It could be 6, could be higher. We don't know. We don't know where that's at, but we could start with, let's first do some cuts. Let's go back to funding levels that make sense. Maybe we look at it in the sense of, okay, we know we're going to, from here on out, if the funding increases are going to be what we have in place in our projections, and we can open up the budgets during the years if there's more and put more money into it. Instead, we want to blow it all the way up there and say we're comparing with other counties, in which the other counties when we compare like that, we can compare for hours and days on that and say, we're the lowest. We should be one of the lowest. Salt Lake County should be the lowest in efficiency basis and everything else, but they're not because they've chosen to grow their government and to grow their economy on that thing all the way out. Because we're the lowest, just as happenstance that the other ones don't. I think we should always be one of the lowest.
So, I just cannot reconcile, to me, I think you really have a heavy burden here to explain how on earth you can approve a $2.5 million increase in 2020 in the attorney's office if you don't know how you're going to pay for that.
It's offsets. So we'll get there. I mean, let's pass what you think needs to be passed today.
No, I mean, this is such a joke because unless you are approving, this makes no sense. You are saying that you're going to come up with a plan. Today is the last day to come up with a plan that has an adjustment in the revenue.
Because this
so
is
hold
not
on.
final.
And you
This
said
is not final.
one.
This is just a cap. So if you want to put a cap on it, put a cap.
Right.
If I come with a plan that makes sense all the way through and it says this is what we can do and this is how we can get out of that, then would you go for it?
Absolutely. That's what I want to do.
We have time from
We
now
are
till
setting a
December
cap, but
3rd.
before we even set a number, you said you're against it. And that's a consistent thing, is that you're always against it. And so what I want to see is some good faith effort to actually balance our budget. That's the responsible thing to do. And so far, I have not seen that. This is your opportunity to say that you're committed to doing that.
No, you know what? In talking with our financials people in the county, I said, I can go through and we can do a tit for tat on this thing, and you can have a proposal, I can have a proposal, but I don't even know what your proposal is. So
Right, I don't have one yet.
Right. So here, well, I mean, proposal in the sense of this presentation. You had a presentation up there. Now, I could have an opposite presentation and say, okay, now let's spend the next 3 hours and talk about a different presentation. But I thought, you know what? It's best probably to hear out and see where we're going with this thing, see what can be reasonable. But if we're looking at 127% tax increase, I'm a no on that.
Sure. But just, you've had 5 years to address the budget issues in Utah County. Okay, so this shouldn't be a timing issue about today or waiting to hear I don't know what you're waiting for to put forward a plan to address our budget challenges in Utah County. So this is a major challenge. And so is there any level of adjustment that you would vote today for a cap?
Right now, no, I'm not prepared to vote for an increase in tax rates.
Bill, just a question. Where in the auditor's numbers do you have concerns, particularly with just the $10 million over our base? Like, where in there do you think that our auditor has misprepared those figures?
And if I may clarify that, Nathan, so in other words, throwing out the things you've already specifically objected to, the building, some of these other issues that you think are speculative, just the baseline budget that Nathan's referring to, this $10.5 million, what's wrong with that?
Just the baseline budget?
Yeah.
Well, again, we can go back and look at the baseline budget and see and go all the way through line item by line item. I have not done that. I don't know if you've gone all the way through every single line item on the baseline or if you just accepted it.
I've gone through with all of my portfolios, line by line, and I can tell you for certainty, and we just had them all come up here, and if you thought there were $10.5 million of cuts, that they were talking about their new request, so that takes it up to $20 million. They weren't even talking about their baseline. If you felt like there were $10.5 million cuts, then you should have told every department up there that they need to fire a big chunk of their employees.
Well, that's again, let's go through this process and let's see where it comes out.
Well, Bill, we're going through the process right now, right? That this is the process, and I'm asking you specifically, in that $10 million, where do you think, where can we save? I'm just as happy as anyone to not have to do this.
Okay, so
that's the question. But in that $10 million, where can we save? And I've had the opportunity, as Tanner did, to sit down with my portfolio people and this isn't even getting into their additional asks, many of which I think are justified to maintain our level of service. And so I'm going, man, we're already starting off in a big hole here, which is what I was concerned about last year. That's why I wanted to just simply freeze our rate last year, because I was concerned this was going to snowball, which it has done. And so I'm asking you to help me see somewhere in that 10 million that Tanner and I and the clerk auditor's office has overlooked that we can save. Where is it in there?
Okay, we'll get there. Since you feel like you got the handle all the way through on where you're at, go ahead and pass it at the level that you feel is needed and necessary, and then we'll continue the conversations till December 3rd.
Well, if we don't have to do it today, I'm happy to listen to your proposal.
I'm not prepared with the proposal today. Like I said, I wanted to listen to the proposal that was coming forward first and see where we're at so that we can adjust appropriately. I don't even know. I don't know what cap you're thinking about. What caps are you thinking about? Are you at the 127%? Are you at a different level? What levels are you thinking? It's hard to propose something when I don't know where the caps are.
Well, I guess that's, you know what I mean? For me, I think that the minimum is we have to do the 10 million to fund our baseline budget. And we can debate back and forth whether we should look at the option for the additional asks.
Well,
but I think at a minimum, we have to say we're going to make sure we have the capacity to fund our government based on the baseline budget that's been presented to us moving forward.
Well, then make that a motion.
And so I think that's a minimum. I'm happy to talk about the additional 10 million because I think there are some staffing needs from several departments, even like the surveyor's department, that need to be addressed that are additional asks. Again, if we want to maintain an appropriate level of service. I mean, the reality is with our staffing levels where they're at, we have department after department that are falling behind. We have a recorder's office that's falling behind. We have an assessor's office that's falling behind. The county surveyor's office is falling behind on their monuments. And so if we continue to not staff them appropriately, which requires more money, they're just going to fall further and further behind. And I think these are areas that are constitutionally mandated essential areas of government. Our surveyor's office protects our property rights. You know, and our recorders have laws that they have to adhere to on timelines. And if we just can't fund these positions to keep them, you know, functioning, that's concerning to me. I feel like we're not fulfilling our responsibility to the citizens of the county.
So where's the cap level that you're comfortable with?
For this particular meeting, I'm happy to set it high so that we can peel it off.
But I mean, I guess I'd come back to you, is there, because this is always a room for us to come to a good solution. Is there any level that you would support, Commissioner Lee?
I'm not right now. I'm not at any level.
But when you say right now, though, that, I mean, there's a statutory deadline.
Yeah, I realize that, and I also realize that the both of you are you know, looking at going ahead and putting that cap rate up there. So go ahead and do that. We can have those conversations, and we can peel back if needed and necessary.
So
Commissioner, why are you unwilling to support us with this so we can be unanimous and say, look, we're going to work together as a unified front to make sure the budget is balanced, and we're going to work together diligently to do all we can to cut it? Well, I guess that's part of my question. I don't understand why you're unwilling to just say, you know what, here's the raw numbers from a clerk auditor that I believe you endorsed, right, and strongly supported in our campaign, and she's the one saying, here's the reality of what we're facing. So I can't understand why you're not willing to just stand with us and say, here's the reality, but we're going to do all we can to get that number down, hopefully to nothing.
Yeah, okay, so, because I'm not there. I'm just not there to do that.
I have a fundamental problem when I listen to last year's meeting, and it says no specific cuts were recommended, and it's let's wait and see. And then earlier in the meeting today, you said, oh, some of those expenses are years out, and now you don't have any real plan that you're putting on the table. So I hear kicking the can down the road, and you've been in this position for 5 years, and then you gave us a lecture on needing the courage to do something to fund our government. What have you done to demonstrate courage to fund our county government?
So let me ask you some questions. Are you willing to take the $2.5 million out of the sheriff's budget? Right off the top?
Well, here's the thing. Sheriff Smith was not around when that contract came. I'm still learning about that. Let's talk about that. We've got we're talking about somewhere, a very high amount of dollars we're spending, $2.5 million. We can get through that. I can find it somewhere. In that issue, I realized that was a problem. That was not under this administration's watch. If you reduce the revenue and you don't see a corresponding decrease in expense, that raises a lot of questions in my mind. I'm with you on getting to the bottom of that. And I've asked the questions of that, but guess what? The sheriff, he has a job to administer that function and oversee corrections. And he could come up here and speak to what he's willing to do to address this issue. That's a great example of things that we can do and that we can do from now until December. But you used a $2.5 million number, and that's not going to solve the problem. But there might be a couple more. But guess what? 2 weeks ago, you approved a $2.5 million increase. So even if you're able to save it on the sheriff's budget, we're still just at break even. So that's my problem, is I'm not seeing another $10 million. And when you ask if I'm willing to cut, I've stood up here on a few different occasions and advocated for cuts that were really painful and had to do so on my own. We had Miss Utah County here, right? I've talked to vendors in the county that have been here forever, and I've advocated terminating these contracts and moving forward to save money. And these are things that I don't want to do. I've got hundreds of emails this week that you know about because I was talking about cuts, because everything's been on the table all year long. That's what I've been doing all year long. And you know that. And so to not have something that you're putting on the table right now and yet ask us to trust that there's cuts, that doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah. Well, motion's in order, whatever motion you want to do.
So do you want Commissioner Ivy and I to pass this motion so that we can continue having this conversation, but you just want to vote no for it? Or
And that's up to you. You're going to have to vote your conscience whichever way you want to go with it.
But that's the other part of this that's interesting, because sometimes I feel like, again, to the courage discussion that you brought up, ultimately, maybe you feel like the government's going to get funded, but you don't want to vote for it? Is that what's happening?
No. Listen, I've been doing this long enough with other commissioners as well, where you think you're going down a path and then it never goes down the path. I've had department heads come in and say, you have to fund us at $1 million more, or else I'm resigning. And my thought was, we'll resign then. And yet, no, there was no courage to say, oh yeah, we're going to hold it accountable. I've seen it where we talk about this, we're asking for it all. We want to fund the whole thing. We have a presentation here that in some respects has a lot of subjectivity to it and a lot of skewedness to it. And so I don't know where we're at. I've seen it before where we just go back and forth and we fund it all and we just say, no, we're not going to have the courage to stand up and hold anybody accountable for it. What have we held accountable so far? What's been accountable? Who's been held accountable?
All the departments. First of all, we haven't approved a budget yet. They've just come through with their asks. But with my portfolio assignments, I've gone through line by line and asked them, why do you need this? What outcome are you going to achieve with this?
With the additional asks?
No, and in some cases, I've kind of said that their baseline budget is okay. But, for example, when I had a conversation with the sheriff's department, I noticed that they had a lot of unfilled positions, and some of those were rolled into the budget. And so I basically treated those like new requests and made them justify those as well. So this is what I've been doing all year long, right?
What would you do? What would you do if you didn't get this tax rate increase?
Well, there have to be terminations if we don't get this tax rate increase. And actually, I was the only one who voted against the 15 new hires. And David Levitt said that if the tax increase doesn't happen, he'll fire the employees. So that's the first group. Is this new batch of attorneys that was hired? They need to be fired. I mean, these are the tough decisions. You know, Commissioner Lee, all year long, when you talk about, like, it's almost like between now and the next meeting, you want to come up with cuts. But from January 1st, forgetting past years, from January 1st until today, you have already increased the budget of 2020 by approving staffing plan changes and not making cuts. By default, we have approved an increased budget. Now we just need to figure out how we're going to pay for it.
A fair analysis.
So, all right. It sounds like this is coming down to you and me, Commissioner Ivey.
Yeah, I'm happy to just entertain a motion and move forward.
So I think that the Davis County number is obviously kind of a ceiling. We're going to, no matter what, we're going to remain the lowest taxing county, urban county along the Wasatch Front. So that's one natural ceiling. Obviously, like you said, a floor is going to be the baseline budget, that 10 million. I don't know.
I can say this, Tanner. From my experience, we've been relatively capable of finding about half of the additional asks to put off, right? And so that's a rough number. And some of those, I think, those additional asks are justified. Some of them are not. As we've worked down through the last 2 years and having all the department heads come together and look at the other departments' asks, they've been able to work in a collaborative spirit that's helped us, trim those additional asks down significantly and say, we can really function and keep going here. And so I'm reluctant. I don't feel comfortable going 20 million because I'm comfortable that we can find some in those additional asks to cut back out.
Commissioner,
and I agree with Commissioner Lee as we look at the leasing options. And, trying to pull down our fleet, we're going to find some additional savings of a couple $1,000,000 here and there.
Totally agree. I hope between now and then we can find a lot of savings. So basically we're saying the baseline budget plus half of the new asks, but then there's the other reserve replenishment and some of the capital needs items that had built up. So Josh, if you were to look at that spreadsheet and you were to just reduce, tell us again what the exact number is at the end of your presentation?
The 36.5 million?
36.5. So then, and what would that be if you just take off half of the new ask? So I guess that reduces it by 6.
Correct.
So that gets to 30 million.
Yeah, I mean, and to some of the other things, like we talked about capital. Okay, well, there's not going to be an expenditure this year. Part of the way these numbers were built, so specifically to the building one, on the slide that talked about building, the assumption was that you would put money in over time. I cannot find that slide. And that's like a 20 to 30 year payback period that you'd be paying, bond payments upwards of $5 million. Part of the problem is that there is no fund balance that was assigned as a savings vehicle to replace the building. So that's one of the fiscal decisions I think that you want to make is, do you want to continue to do that in the future? Whether you build a building now and bond for it and pay $5 million a year, or you do something else, do you want to change the way in which you budget your expenditures and you want to actually save money for future capital expenses? Because, and there's been discussion about that capital projects plan. And so far, the policies that you've enacted, you're moving towards a situation where you want to be saving money for capital projects into the future. And so that's partly built into here. So if you don't do that, you're not going to be doing that, right? So that's a big chunk of this as well.
So at 30 million, what's the percentage year over year on that one?
Let me give you a quick, so you're saying by percentage, you mean tax rate?
No, I mean the year over year. You had it at 127 on the 36.5.
Yeah, so I've got to first calculate what tax rate would be required to generate 30 million of revenue versus 36.5 million revenue. Then compare that tax rate to the previous tax rate.
Okay. While he's doing that, I think the other point, Commissioner Lee, you made the point that we can open up budgets, but I just want to clarify, we are at a deadline here to set any adjustment so that we can have the conversation for the rest of the year. The other thing is, that's the only thing that's going to change the ultimate amount of money, if I'm understanding this correctly. So opening the budget will just deal with allocating the money, but it's not like we're going to have time in the middle of the year to take any revenue-raising activity. Correct?
Right.
So it's,
I mean,
you
the
gotta.
reason why you'd open up the budget is, let's say that our forecast of 3.2 was low.
Sure, some additional
Additional
revenue came in because we underestimated the amount of sales tax or property tax that
the
we
sale of
applied.
the property came in at, we were estimating here, and it came in higher. There'd be
Got it.
additional revenue.
Got it.
That's the reason for the opening up the budget.
So, yeah, funds can come in, but we wouldn't be able to change rates during the midst of the year.
Slightly true, Tanner. We could actually reduce the rate. So if funds come in and we're exceeding our projections, the rate could go down. We just can't increase. This for like a point of clarification. And I think that's something all of us would be excited to do if we did have to exceed the rate this year as we go through this process. And then our projections are off and we get to that point where we actually finalize and set that rate. If our projections are ahead of ourselves and revenue increases from sales tax or something are up, we can certainly bump it back down at that point in time, but it could never go back up or exceed that.
Got it.
We actually don't set the rate till March. I think it's March. June?
June, right?
Okay. That's a helpful clarification.
So I don't have the percentage yet, but just so you know, you'd be going from a current rate for general government of 672 to a new rate of 1376.
I think it's 105.
Yeah, for purposes of the resolution, you're required to state the percentage increase of the property tax portion of the revenue, and the 30 million will represent a 104.73% increase.
Yep, that's correct.
Okay. Perhaps as a starting point for a cap, we could set it just at the 28. If you scroll back up, Josh, I'm looking at. We could set the cap at the 28.6, basically the same, but as the 2019 budgeted. 28,644,575. That's the number that.
And that makes sense to me.
Yeah. So just set our additional ask at the same as the 19 ask.
So just double, 100% is what you're saying the increase would be.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'll move that we approve regular agenda item number 5, filling in the numbers reflected in cell C13 and D13 represented here on this chart. And for the basic levy, the new rate, wherever that is, C18, to be filled into the resolution.
I would
Second.
I would suggest those numbers be stated in the minutes so that it's clear what those dollar amounts are for the resolution, which to my understanding would be $28,644. And representing.
575.
Oh, excuse me.
28 million?
28, so yeah, so those numbers are 28,644,575, which is a 100% increase, and a basic levy, or estimated rate of .001344.
Okay, I will second that.
Okay, I got a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye?
Aye.
Opposed? Nay. Passes 2-1. Commissioner Ainge and Commissioner Ivey in the ayes, and Commissioner Lee in the negative. All right, we need, for closed meetings, we need number 6, 7, and 9.
You mean there's more meetings?
Yep.
I move that we strike regular agenda item number 8.
Second.
Got a motion and a second to strike agenda item number 8. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. That passes 3-0.
Move that we approve and set a time, date, and location for this location immediately following this meeting for the items set forth in regular agenda items number 6, 7, and 9.
Second.
We got a motion and a second to approve and set a date, time, and locations for items 6, 7, and 9 on our regular agenda. All in favor, say aye.
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 That passes 3-0. There are no work sessions. Is there any public comment? Okay, seeing none, we'll move into our closed meetings.